Hello, I'm your host, Grey Waste Tim, and you are in the Den of the Grey Waste. And joining me, of course, is Damon. So today we are going to talk about. Okay, bye, Damon. We are going to talk about The King in Yellow. This is a birthday. Yes, thank you. Yes, technically my birthday is August 31st. It's Monday. So, but I work Monday through Friday. So. And Sunday is Dave's day, so we're gonna do today. But yes, this is a follow-up to my latest video, Roads to Carcosa. So I just figured we'd celebrate by just straight up reading some King in Yellow and some Carcosa stories. So thank you for everyone who showed up, and just so without further ado, let's just go straight into it. I sense on crystal winter evenings, when constellations gleam through black branch trees, a night dark star no earthly gazer sees, to which some dread malevolently clings. No star chart shows it, no, yet slumber brings its vision from the clustered Hyades, black waters over which a leaden breeze wafts the sad song that dead Casilda sings. No darker vision greets the sleeper than that lake from which the coiling cloud waves pour to break upon the long basaltic shore beneath the rays of red Aldebaran, the lake whence dreamers flee in nameless dread as Hastur rises from his slimy bed. And that is a poem by Richard L. Tierney, which this is the opening to the Hastur cycle, which is a collection of both King in Yellow stories and Lovecraftian stories where Hastur, the great old one who uses the King in Yellow as his earthly avatar, features. So for today, we are going to start at the beginning with Ambrose Bierce's An Inhabitant of Carcosa, which is where we first get the term Carcosa going, all the way back to 1886. Robert W. Chambers, when he created the King in Yellow, he did borrow elements from Ambrose Bierce, such as the names Hastur, Hawley, and Carcosa, when creating his setting. So just like Lovecraft, so Lovecraft borrowed from him and Chambers borrowed from others. And you see like how like one writer sort of leapfrogs off the other until we get to the world of Lovecraft and his whole circle of writers, like August Derleth, like Robert Bloch, like Robert E. Howard, who all borrowed places, characters, and settings from one another and created this sort of this living story that continues on to this day. But it is in An Inhabitant of Carcosa by Ambrose Bierce where all of this begins. So, for there be diverse sorts of death, somewhere in the body remaineth, and in some it vanisheth quiet away with the spirit. This commonly occurreth only in solitude, such is God's will. And none seeing the end, we say the man is lost, or gone on a long journey, which indeed he hath, but sometimes it hath happened in sight of many, as abundant testimony showeth. In one kind of death. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tommy of the North Uncle Alert. Yes, and if you do want to contribute, super chats and PayPals are never expected, but always appreciated. So where did we? Oh yeah, but sometimes it hath happened in sight of many, as abundant testimony showeth. In one kind of death, the spirit also dieth, and this it hath been known to do while yet the body was in vigor for many years. Sometimes it is verily attested, it dieth with the body, but after a season is raised up again in that place where the body did decay. And these are words of the philosopher Hawley, whom Ambrose Bierce created, and whose name would then be applied to the cloud lake of Carcosa. Oh, and the mask is here. The mask was here, ready and waiting for when it became relevant. And of course, George R. R. Martin will also take some of these themes and apply them to this opening from the words of Hawley. Does apply to it's when Qyburn is talking about the idea that the spirit lingers, right? When he's talking about how, and in his creation, his motives of trying to create life, which is how we get things like Robert Strong and the science whites, as they've been called. But yeah, that the body dieth, but that something, while the body dies, something remains, something lingers for some time afterward. Pondering these words of Hawley, whom God rest, and questioning their full meaning, as one who, having an intimation, yet doubts if there be not something behind, other than that which she has discerned, I note it not whither I had strayed, until a sudden chill wind striking my face revived me a sense of my surroundings. I observed with astonishment that everything seemed unfamiliar. On every side of me stretched a bleak and desolate expanse of plain, covered with a tall overgrowth of sere grass, which rustled and whistled in the autumn wind with heaven knows what mysterious and disquieting suggestion. Protruding at long intervals above it stood strangely shaped and somber-colored rocks, which seemed to have an understanding with one another and to exchange looks of uncomfortable significance, as if they had reared their heads to watch the issue of some foreseen event. A few blasted trees here and there appeared as leaders in this malevolent conspiracy of silent expectation. The day, I thought, must be far advanced, though the sun was invisible, and although sensible that the air was raw and chill, my consciousness of that fact was rather mental than physical. I had no feeling of discomfort. Over all the dismal landscape, a canopy of low, lead-colored clouds hung like a visible curse. In all this, there were a menace and a portent, a hint of evil, an intimation of doom. Bird, beast, or insect there was none. The wind sighed in the bare branches of the dead trees, and the gray grass bent to whisper its dread secret to the earth. But no other sound nor motion broke the awful repose of that dismal place. And you can see, like here, this is all very Ashai coded. This is all very reminiscent of the Shadowlands of what George's doing, and that is the specific purpose why George placed Carcosa where he did. Now, if you watched my video, I did use a clip of an interview with George where he talked about like needing to fill out the map because he needed just as much to the east of Carth as he did to the west of Carth, because he had made the Carth the center of the world, which is, is the Carthene blowing their own hot air. And he ran out of place names, so he started making references, and that's why Carcosa and Kadath and all these other references show up. But he puts them all more or less in the same area. Like Carcosa is north of the Shadowlands. It's where the mountains of the Morn open up. It's on the Hidden Sea. Like, for as much fun as George had with just making the reference, he also purposely put things around it that also, because it's one thing to just put Carcosa there. It's a whole other thing to absolutely have it be on an inland lake like Carcosa from the story is on the Lake of Holly, to have it surrounded by mountains, to have it out both in within the Gray Waste and the Shadowlands, to place it at the very edge of the earth where the map cuts off. These are all very deliberate actions on George's part, and it is all to invoke the themes and settings from the writers that came before him. I observed in the herbage a number of weather-worn stones, evidently shaped with tools. They were broken, covered with moss, and half sunken in the earth. Some lay prostrate, some leaned at various angles, none was vertical. They were obviously headstones of graves, though the graves themselves no longer existed as either mounds or depression. The years had leveled all. Scattered here and there, more massive blocks showed where some pompous tomb or ambitious monument had once flung its feeble defiance at oblivion. So old seemed these relics, these vestiges of vanity and memorials of affection and piety. So battered and worn and stained, so neglected, deserted, forgotten the place, that I could not help thinking myself the discoverer of the burial ground of a prehistoric race of men whose very name was long extinct. Filled with these reflections, I was for some time heedless of the sequence of my own experiences, but soon I thought, how came I hither? A moment's reflection seemed to make this all clear and explain at the same time, though in a disquieting way, the singular character with which my fancy had invented all that I saw or heard. I was ill. I remembered now that I had been prostrated by a sudden fever, and that my family had told me that in my periods of delirium I had constantly cried out for liberty and air, and had been held in bed to prevent my escape out of doors. Now I had eluded the vigilance of my attendants and had wandered hitherto. To where? I could not conjecture. Clearly, I was at a considerable distance from the city where I dwelt, the ancient and famous city of Carcosa. No signs of human life were anywhere visible nor audible. No rising smoke, no watchdog's bark, no lowing of cattle, no shouts of children at play. There are no children in Ashai. Again, like, you can see like where George is picking up a lot of the themes that he would use in crafting a place like Ashai. It is very much a Carcosa stand-in, while also name dropping Carcosa just for wider world building. Nothing but that dismal burial place with its air of mystery and dread, due to my own disordered brain. Was I not becoming delirious there beyond human aid? Was it not indeed all an illusion of my madness? I called aloud the names of my wives and son, reached out my hands in search of theirs, even as I walked among the crumbling stones and in the withered grass. A noise behind me caused me to turn about. A wild animal, a lynx, was approaching. The thought came to me, if I break down here in the desert, if the fever return and I fail, this beast will be at my throat. I sprang toward it, shouting. It trotted tranquilly by within a hand's breadth of me and disappeared behind a rock. So originally Gerton planned to have Danny go to Ashai, and then he changed his mind. Do you think we'll ever see anything from the Far East in the main series? It seems like we should never see it. In the main series, probably not. I'm banking more on the Corliss animated show. So Corliss's 9 Voyages, Ashai is one of the places he visits, and where he may have actually come across the Sun Chaser from Alyssa Farman. I don't think George is ever going to take us in a main series book to Ashai, at least not no character is going to visit it in person. Maybe we'll see glimpses of it through a glass candle. If Marwyn makes it to her, and if he contacts Quaithe, but that all depends if Quaithe has returned home to Ashai or if she's still hanging out in Karth. A moment later, a man's head appeared to rise out of the ground a short distance away. He was ascending the farther slope of a low hill, whose crest was hardly to be distinguished from the general level. His whole figure soon came into view against the background of gray cloud. He was half naked, half clad in skins. His hair was unkempt, his beard long and ragged. In one hand he carried a bow and arrow, the other held a blazing torch, with a long trail of black smoke. He walked slowly and with caution, as if he feared falling into some open grave concealed by the tall grass. This strange apparition surprised but did not alarm me, and taking such a course as to intercept him, I met him almost face to face, accosting him with the familiar salutation, "God keep you." He gave no heed, nor did he arrest his pace. "Good stranger," I continued, "I am ill and lost. Direct me, I beseech you, to Carcosa." The man broke into a barbarous chant in an unknown tongue, passing on and away. An owl on the branch of a decayed tree hooted dismally and was answered by another in the distance. Looking upward, I saw a sudden rift in the clouds, Aldebaran and the Hyades. In all this, there was a hint of night. The lynx, the man with the torch, the owl. Yet I saw even the stars in absence of the darkness. I saw, but was apparently not seen nor heard. Under what awful spell did I exist? I seated myself at the root of a great tree, seriously to consider what it were best to do. That I was mad I could no longer doubt, yet recognized a ground of doubt in the conviction. Of fever I had no trace. I had, withal, a sense of exhilaration and vigor altogether unknown to me, a feeling of mental and physical exaltation. My senses seemed all alert. I could feel the air as a ponderous substance. I could hear the silence. A great root of the giant tree against whose trunk I leaned as I sat held enclosed in its grasp a slab of stone, a part of which protruded into a recess formed by another root. The stone was thus partly protected from the weather, though greatly decomposed. Its edges were worn round, its corners eaten away, its surface deeply furrowed and scaled. Glittering particles of mica were visible in the earth about it, vestiges of its decomposition. This stone had apparently marked the grave out of which the tree had sprung ages ago. So if you are familiar with my black coffin theory, something I've talked on my channel and with Dave about a lot is my belief of what lays at the heart of winter is going to be a burial mound, a grave wrapped up within the roots of a giant weirwood tree or possibly shade tree, but some kind of frozen tree in the far north, a body buried beneath it, possibly black stone, and that body now wrapped up within the roots of said tree. And here it all is again. In 1886, an inhabitant of Carcosa, it is the gravestone that is within the tree roots, in the gray and desolate city. So the tree's exacting roots had robbed the grave. And it robbed the grave and made the stone a prisoner. A prisoner wrapped up in the weirwood net. The body of, this is my Black Coffin theory, that it's the body of Azor Ahai, of Night's King, of Bloodstone Emperor. Depends on if George wants to make all of these guys the same person or not. But yeah, a body, someone who entered the weirwood net, but did so against the weirwood's will, and is now trapped as some kind of is now trapped within the roots, but its will exists. Its spirit carries on. It's more of a it's a revenant, a grave for a revenant. And of course, George plays with all this too, not just with the crypts of Winterfell, where the deeper we go, the more you see weirwood roots, and then there's the cave-in. He does this with the Barrowlands, right? So Barrowton, where the Dustins are from, the Barrow Kings. These are corpse kings. Lots and lots of this stuff out of made of burial mounds, but also them purposely being wrapped up within trees. A sudden wind pushed some dry leaves and twigs from the uppermost face of the stone. I saw the low relief letters of an inscription and bent to read it. God in heaven, my name in full, the date of my birth, the date of my death. A level shaft of light illuminated the whole side of the tree as I sprang to my feet in terror. The sun was rising in the rosy east. I stood between the tree and his broad red disk. No shadow darkened the trunk. A chorus of howling wolves saluted the dawn. I saw them sitting on their haunches, singly and in groups, on the summits of irregular mounds and tumuli filling a half of my desert prospect and extending to the horizon. And then I knew that these were the ruins of the ancient and famous city of Carcosa. Such are the facts imparted to the medium barrels by the spirit Hosea Alar Roberdan. And that whole last section, right? It screams Jon and his resurrection. And if we were to think, what is Jon's spirit feeling in the time from the time that Jon has been stabbed up until the time that of his resurrection, while his soul, right, is out there stuck in limbo, possibly in the soul jar, in Ghost as a soul jar. What is his spirit seeing while having this sort of out of body experience? We could see it summed up here in an Inhabitant of Carcosa. But also what this is Inhabitant of Carcosa is done in the very spirit of writers like Poe. These are the ghost stories of the 19th century, which would then give way to the cosmic horror of the 20th century. I talked about the bridge between Poe and Lovecraft being writers like Chambers, who would start to take these gothic horror elements, but also then start to blend in more cosmic dread and nihilism into them. And this is how we get our early examples of cosmic horror that writers like Lovecraft would then gravitate towards and capitalize on. And from there, we move to the Repairer of Reputations. And this is the first King in Yellow story proper. So, in Robert W. Chambers' The King in Yellow, it is a collection of stories, the first four of which heavily center on the King in Yellow. The fifth story, the Demoiselle Dise, only has fleeting reference to it. The name Hastur comes up. And then the remaining stories start to turn into more lighthearted romance. Chambers, while The King in Yellow is definitely his most famous work, he didn't stay in the world of horror for very long. He moved on. He started to write more romances. They never reached the heights that the King in Yellow reached. Like, they would be successful. He would live for years. King in Yellow came out in 1895. Chambers lived to 1933, so almost 40 years after The King in Yellow came out. He was still kicking, still writing, but those romance pastiches that he would write after The King in Yellow never reached the levels of this. But of those four stories, if I had to rank them personally, the Repairer of Reputations is my favorite. In the Court of the Dragon is second, but the Yellow Sign is a very close third. and then The Mask is the fourth. And that's not to say that The Mask is bad. It's just that, as I said, like how Chambers was moving away from horror towards romance, that drive to start writing romance really shows through in The Mask. So of the four horror stories, The Mask is the one that feels the least horror. And because of that, it's my least favorite of the four. Still a good story, but you definitely see that Chambers working his way away from horror towards romance, and having romance become the main genre that he would focus on for the rest of his life. Now, The Repairer of Reputations. Okay, where do I even begin with this one? All right, so The Repairer of Reputations is a horror story, a satire, and an anti-story, all in the same way. And we're going to come to it because there's going to be some lines that are going to that possibly will make you raise an eyebrow and go, "What the hell did you just say? Repeat that again." And we're going to put it into context when we get into it. But I am just forewarning you, like there's two lines in particular, actually a couple lines in particular in the story that are going to sound. On the surface, are going to sound incredibly horrible, but we're going to put them into context when we start to realize that this is a satire that Chambers is writing, but also wrapped up in horror, and it's being told to us by a man who is very, very, very mentally unwell. So. The Repairer of Reputations. And my pronunciation of French is horrible. So I'm just going to read the translation of this first part. "Do not mock the fools. Their madness lasts longer than ours. That is the only difference." So, toward the end of the year 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program, adopted during the last months of President Winthrop's administration. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knows how the tariff and labor questions were settled. The war with Germany, incident on that country's seizure of the Samoan Islands, had left no visible scars upon the Republic. And the temporary occupation of Norfolk by the invading army had been forgotten in the joy over repeated naval victories and the subsequent ridiculous plight of General von Gartenlaub's forces in the state of New Jersey. The Cuban and Hawaiian investments had paid 100%, and the territory of Samoa was well worth its cost as a coaling station. The country was in a superb state of defense. Every coast city had been well supplied with land fortifications. The army, under the parental eye of the general staff, organized according to the Prussian system, had been increased to 300,000 men with a territorial reserve of 1 million, and 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas, leaving a steam reserve amply fitted to control home waters. The gentlemen from the West had at least been constrained to acknowledge that a college for the training of diplomats was as necessary as law schools are for the training of barristers. Consequently, we were no longer represented abroad by incompetent patriots. The nation was prosperous. Now, thing is, this takes place in 1920 in New York City, but he wrote this in 1895. So for Robert W. Chambers, 1920 would have been 25 years in the future. And what is happening here is this is a dystopian story of a fascist government coming to prominence in the United States after a gigantic war with Germany and the other major European powers. World War I was still 20 years away when he wrote this story. World War II was still 40 years away. When we get more into the story, it is eerie. how close Chambers was to predicting the future. Because even though World War I wouldn't break out for another 20 years, by this point in time, the alliance system was already in full swing. Men like Otto von Bismarck had already made his blood and iron speech. He had already made the comment about some damn fool thing in the Balkans. We see like this huge military buildup. This is all empire building. Technology is increasing. They're creating new weapons of war, more sophisticated war, but with an old school, old-timey imperial mindset behind it, right? That is what made World War One so terrible, right? The new world technology, but being implemented with old world tactics. Again, so Robert W. Chambers saw the writing on the wall. He knew in 1895 that something was going to happen. The time bomb hadn't gone off yet, but the clock was ticking down, and he saw it in the horizon. The only thing he got wrong is that he puts the fascist dystopian stuff happening in America after the war rather than Germany. But to be fair, Nazi ideology was based, a good portion of its ideology was based upon the practice of segregation as it was happening in America. Germany took notes from the United States when it came to crafting their racial ideology. But yeah, it's just, again, knowing that this story was written in 1895, that World War I was still 20 years out, yet Chambers, he got so much of it right. It's scary how much of it he foretold, just from the atmosphere that was going on around him. Because again, if you watch the video, there was the Panic of 1893 had happened 2 years earlier. We see this growing class divide between the rich and the poor. This is the era of Carnegie and Rockefeller. This is the era where we're getting the first modern billionaires. Meanwhile, the disconnect between the classes is growing. And it's also taking place during the decadent movement, the French decadence. So just lots and lots of things going on. And this is Chambers making commentary on all of it and predictions for the future. And yeah, he gets a lot of it right. He placed it in America rather than Germany, but that's not to say that America wasn't treading down that road already. Okay, so Chicago, for a moment paralyzed after a second Great Fire, had risen from its ruins, white and imperial, and more beautiful than the white city which had been built for its plaything in 1893. Everywhere good architecture was replacing bad, and even in New York, a sudden craving for decency had swept away a great portion of the existing horrors. Streets had been widened, property paved and lighted, trees had been planted, squares laid out, elevated structures demolished, and underground roads built to replace them. The new government buildings and barracks were fine bits of architecture, and the long system of stone quays which completely surrounded the island had been turned into parks, which proved a godsend to the population. The subsidizing of the state theater and state opera brought its own reward. The United States National Academy of Design was much like European institutions of the same kind. Nobody envied the Secretary of Fine Arts, either his cabinet or his portfolio. The Secretary of Forestry and Game Preservation had a much easier time, thanks to the new system of National Mounted Police. This is where we get to the eyebrow-raising lines. We had profited well by the latest treaties with France and England, the exclusion of foreign-born Jews as a measure of national self-preservation, the settlement of the new independent Negro state of Swanee, the checking of immigration, the new laws concerning naturalization, and the gradual centralization of power in the executive all contributed to national calm and prosperity. So the way that this fascist dystopian government is creating its utopia, right, is by kicking out all the foreigners, specifically Jews and blacks. But again, but this is a satire, right? This is not to say that Robert W. Chambers wasn't racist, but 1895, like, obviously he's going to be a product of his time. But really what he's doing here is, and I'll point it out when we get into it more, when we start to learn more about our narrator, Hildred. He's writing this in the same vein as Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal. And if you don't know what A Modest Proposal is, that is an essay by Jonathan Swift where he proposes that we can end poverty by eating children, that poor people should eat their kids or sell them away as food. Now, it's a completely outlandish statement, but Swift plays it so straightforward. He uses logic, ration, and reason to argue his point. He is so straightforward in his delivery, and so adamant that we can end the poverty problem by eating children. He just plays it completely straightforward, and it's total deadpan humor. Chambers is doing the same thing in this story, only the problem that he is tackling is race relations and reconstruction after a giant war. So when the government solved the Indian problem and squadrons of Indian cavalry scouts in native costume were substituted for the pitiable organizations tacked on to the trail of skeletonized regiments by a former Secretary of War, the nation drew a long sigh of relief. When after the colossal congress of religions, bigotry and intolerance were laid in their graves, and kindness and charity began to draw warring sects together, many through the millennium had arrived, at least in the New World, which after all is a world by itself. But self-preservation is the first law, and the United States had to look on in helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, and Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy, while Russia, watching from the Caucasus, stooped and bound them one by one. In the city of New York, the summer of 1899 was signalized by the dismantling of the elevated railroads. The summer of 1900 will live in the memories of New York people for many a cycle. The Dodge statue was removed in that year. In the following winter began their agitation for the repeal of the laws prohibiting suicide, which bore All right. Are we back? The government shut us down. Things got way too real reading this story. Okay, we're back. We're back. We just we're gonna get back on cycle. We're gonna back. Yeah, this is what between the end, the way I ended that last video, and now talking about the things I am like, If you aren't on at least one government watch list, are you even living? Right? Maybe I should turn on my VPN just to be safe. Okay. So where we left off before that happened was Yeah, they shut down touch. And they ended the laws prohibiting suicide when the first government lethal chamber was opened on Washington Square. And I'm going to talk more about the lethal chamber when we get into it. I had walked down that day from Dr. Archer's house on Madison Avenue, where I had been as a mere formality. Ever since that fall from my horse 4 years before, I had been troubled at times with pains in the back of my head and neck. But now for months they had been absent, and the doctor sent me away that day saying there was nothing more to be cured in me. It was hardly worth his fee to be told that. I knew it myself. Still, I did not begrudge him the money. What I minded was the mistake which he made at first, when they picked me up from the pavement where I lay unconscious, and somebody had mercifully sent a bullet through my horse's head. I was carried to Dr. Archer, and he, pronouncing my brain affected, placed me in his private asylum where I was obliged to endure treatment for insanity. This is our main character and narrator, Hildred Costain. The man telling us about all of these events has just recently been released from an insane asylum after a 4-year stay, after an accident in which he was thrown from his horse and had a severe head injury. This is what I say when I meant that this is also an anti-story. How much of what we can take from Hildred when he tells us these things about what's going on in New York and what's going on in the state of the world, we need to take it with a massive pile of salt. And Chambers, for his part, when pressed, never gave a definitive answer as to just how much of this story was real and how much of it was taking place in his head. What we need to focus on is when we meet Hildred's cousin, Lewis, the way that Lewis reacts to what Hildred is saying and doing, and what Lewis says, his lines, they are the things that are going to give us a real glimpse as to what is actually happening. So, when Hildred talks, unreliable. When Lewis speaks, pay attention. At last he decided that I was well, and I, knowing that my mind had always been as sound as his, if not sounder, paid my tuition, as he jokingly called it, and left. I told him, smiling, that I would get even with him for his mistake, and he laughed heartily and asked me to call once in a while. I did so, hoping for a chance to even up accounts, but he gave me none, and I told him I would wait. Another thing that Chambers is doing, if you are familiar with Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, the narrator of that story is also insane. He is the murderer, and he opens the story by telling us just how sane he is. That even though he can hear many things in hell, we have to believe him because he's telling us, guys, I am totally sane, and my act of murder was totally justified, and I'm going to explain why. Hildred Costain is that same type of character as the narrator from The Telltale Heart. He truly believes that he is sane, that he is of sound mind, that he is the reasonable, rational one, that it's everyone else who is making the mistakes. Yet at the same time, he's going to believe that he is an envoy for the King in Yellow. The fall from my horse had fortunately left no evil results. On the contrary, it had changed my whole character for the better. From a lazy young man about town, I had become active, energetic, temperate, and above all else, ambitious. There was only one thing which troubled me. I laughed at my own uneasiness, yet it troubled me. During my convalescence, I had bought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. So, if you remember back to the video, I had said that the King in Yellow, reading it can sort of is what allows the King's influence to come through. It opens the interstice, but most of the people that come into contact with this book are already in some kind of harrowed state. Hildred right here is a broken man already when he when he reads the King in Yellow. So you have an already unstable man who is just going to be shattered further after reading this fucking book. I remembered after finishing the first act that occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book into the fireplace. The volume struck the barred gate and fell open on the hearth in the firelight. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words in the second act, I should never have finished it. But as I stooped to pick it up, my eyes became riveted to the open page. And with a cry of terror, or perhaps it was of joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve, I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept to my bedroom, where I read it and reread it and wept and laughed and trembled with a horror which at times assails me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon, when the twin suns sink into the lake of Holly, and my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. I pray God will curse the writer, as the writer has cursed the world with his beautiful, stupendous creation. Terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth. A world which now trembles before the King in Yellow. When the French government seized the translated copies which had just arrived in Paris, London, of course, became eager to read it. It is well known how the book spread like an infectious disease from city to city, from continent to continent, barred out here, confiscated there, denounced by press and pulpit, censored even by the most advanced of literary anarchists. No definite principles had been violated in those wicked pages, no doctrine promulgated, no convictions outraged. It could not be judged by any known standard. Yet, although it was acknowledged that the supreme note of art had been struck in the King in Yellow, all felt that human nature could not bear the strain, nor thrive on words in which the essence of purest poison lurked. The very banality and innocence of the first act only allowed the blow to fall afterward with more awful effect. It was, I remember, the 13th day of April 1920 that the first government lethal chamber was established on the south side of Washington Square between Wooster Street and South Fifth Avenue. The block, which had formerly consisted of a lot of shabby old buildings used as cafes and restaurants for foreigners, had been acquired by the government in the winter of 1898. The French and Italian cafes were torn down. The whole block was enclosed by a gilded iron railing and converted into a lovely garden with lawns, flowers, and fountains. In the center of the garden stood a small white building, severely classical in architecture and surrounded by thickets of flowers. 6 Ionic columns supported the roof, and the single door was of bronze. A splendid marble group of the Fates stood before the door, the work of a young American sculptor, Boris Yevren, who had died in Paris when only 23 years old. And Boris is one of the main characters in The Mask. So there are allusions to the other stories within the stories. The inauguration ceremonies were in progress as I crossed University Place and entered the square. I threaded my way through the silent throng of spectators, but was stopped at 4th Street by a cordon of police. A regiment of United States Lancers were drawn up in a hollow square around the lethal chamber. On a raised tribune facing Washington Park stood the governor of New York, and behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and Brooklyn, the inspector general police, the commandant of the state troops, Colonel Livingston, military aide to the President of the United States, General Blount, commanding at Governor's Island, Major General Hamilton, commanding the garrison of New York and Brooklyn, Admiral Buffby of the fleet in the North Rivers, Surgeon General Lansford, the staff of the National Free Hospital, Senators Wise and Franklin of New York, and the Commissioner of Public Works. The Tribune was surrounded by a squadron of hussars of the National Guard. The governor was finishing his reply to the short speech of the Surgeon General. I heard him say, "The laws prohibiting suicide and providing punishment for any attempt at self-destruction have been repealed. The government has seen fit to acknowledge the right of man to end an existence which may have become intolerable to him, through physical suffering or mental despair. It is believed that the community will be benefited by the removal of such people from their midst. Since the passage of this law, the number of suicides in the United States has not increased. Now that the government has determined to establish a lethal chamber in every city, town, and village in the country, it remains to be seen whether or not that class of human creatures from whose desponding ranks new victims of self-destruction fall daily will accept the relief thus provided." He paused and turned to the white lethal chamber. The silence in the street was absolute. There a painless death awaits him who can no longer bear the sorrows of this life. If death is welcome, let him seek it there. Then quickly returning to the military aid of the president's household, he said, "I declare the lethal chamber open." And again, facing the vast crowd, he cried in a clear voice, "Citizens of New York and the United States of America, through me, the government declares the lethal chamber to be open." So, New York has just opened the first suicide chamber. But the government is so adamant that nobody is going to use these, because why would they? It's a wonder world. Everything's great. Everything's great in this fascist utopia that we have built. Nobody's ever going to want to kill themselves. In fact, we are so sure. You see, like, this is how the satire is coming through. We are so sure that absolutely nobody is going to use the free suicide booth that we're going to open them in every major city in America. That's how sure we are that these are not necessary.
Please select mode of death, quick and painless, or slow and horrible.
Yeah, I'd like to place a collect call.
You have selected slow and horrible.
Good choice. Bring it on, baby!
There are references where you least expect them. But yeah, that's essentially what happened. You picture Futurama. Yeah, the suicide booths in New York. Where do you think they got the idea from? The solemn hush was broken by a sharp cry of command. The squadron of hussars filed after the governor's carriage. The lancers wheeled and formed along Fifth Avenue to wait for the commandment of the garrison, and the mounted police followed them. I left the crowd to gape and stare at the white marble death chamber, and crossing South Fifth Avenue, walked along the western side of that thoroughfare to Bleecker Street. Then I turned to the right and stopped before a dingy shop which bore the sign, Hawberk, Armorer. I glanced in at the doorway, and Hawberk, busy in his little shop at the end of the hall. He looked up and, catching sight of me, cried in his deep, hearty voice, "Come in, Mr. Castaigne." Constance, his daughter, rose to meet me as I crossed the threshold and held out her pretty hand. But I saw the blush of disappointment on her cheeks, knew that it was another Castaigne she had expected, my cousin Louis. I smiled at her confusion and complimented her on the banner which she was embroidering from a colored plate. Old Hawberk sat riveting the worn greaves of some ancient suit of armor, and the ting-ting-ting of his little hammer sounded pleasantly in the quaint shop. Presently he dropped his hammer and fussed about for a moment with a tiny wrench. The soft clash of the mail sent a thrill of pleasure through me. I loved to hear the music of steel brushing against steel, the mellow shock of the mallet on thigh pieces, and the jingle of chain armor. That was the only reason I went to see Hawberk. He had never interested me personally, nor did Constance, except for the fact of her being in love with Louis. This did not occupy my attention, and sometimes even kept me awake at night. But I knew in my heart that all would come right, and that I should arrange their future as I expected to arrange that of my own kind doctor, John Archer. However, I should never have troubled myself about visiting them just then, had it not been, as I say, that the music of the tinkling hammer had for me this strong fascination. I would sit for hours listening, and when a stray sunbeam struck the inland steel, the sensation it gave me was almost too keen to endure. My eyes would have become fixated, dilating with a pleasure that stretched every nerve almost to breaking, until some movement of the old armorer cut off the ray of sunlight. Then, still thrilling secretly, I leaned back and listened again to the sound of the polishing rag, swish, swish, rubbing rust from the rivets. Constance worked with the embroidery over her knees, now and then pausing to examine more closely the pattern in the colored plate from the Metropolitan Museum. "Who is this for?" I asked. Hallberg explained that in addition to the treasures of armor in the Metropolitan Museum, of which he had been appointed armorer, he also had charge of several collections belonging to rich amateurs. This was the missing greave of a famous suit which a client of his had traced to a little shop in Paris on the Quai d'Orsay. He, Hallberg, had negotiated for and secured the greave, and now the suit was complete. He laid down his hammer and read me the history of the suit, traced since 1450 from owner to owner until it was acquired by Thomas Stainbridge. When his superb collection was sold, this client of Hallberg's bought the suit, and since then the search for the missing greave had been pushed until it was, almost by accident, located in Paris. "Did you continue the search so persistently without any certainty of the greave being still in existence?" I demanded. "Of course," he replied coolly. Then for the first time I took a personal interest in Hallberg. "It was worth something to you," I ventured. "No," he replied, laughing. "My pleasure in finding it was my reward." "Have you no ambition to be rich?" I asked, smiling. "My one ambition is to be the best armorer in the world," he answered gravely. Constance asked me if I had seen the ceremonies at the Lethal Chamber. She herself had noticed cavalry passing up Broadway that morning and had wished to see the inauguration, but her father wanted the banner finished, and she had stayed at his request. "Did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne, there?" she asked, with the slightest tremor of her soft eyelashes. "No," I replied carelessly. "Lewis's regiment is maneuvering out in Westchester County." I rose and picked up my hat and cane. "Are you going upstairs to see the lunatic again?" laughed old Hallberg. If Hallberg knew how I loathed that word lunatic, he would never use it in my presence. It arouses certain feelings within me which I do not care to explain. However, I answered him quietly. "I think I shall drop in and see Mr. Wilde for a moment or two." "Poor fellow," said Constance with a shake of her head. "It must be hard to live alone year after year, poor, crippled, and almost demented. It is very good of you, Mr. Castaigne, to visit him as often as you do." "I think he is vicious," observed Hallberg, beginning again with his hammer. I listened to the golden tinkle on the greave plates. When he had finished, I replied, "No, he is not vicious, nor is he in the least demented. His mind is a wonder chamber from which he can extract treasures that you and I would give years of our lives to acquire." Hallberg laughed. I continued, a little impatiently, "He knows history as no one else could know it. Nothing, however trivial, escapes his search, and his memory is so absolute, so precise in details, that were it known in New York that such a man existed, the people could not honor him enough." "Nonsense," muttered Hallberg, searching on the floor for a fallen rivet. "Is it nonsense?" I asked, managing to suppress what I felt. "Is it nonsense when he says that the tassets and cuissard of the enameled suit of armor, commonly known as the Prince's Emblazoned, can be found among a mass of rusty theatrical properties, broken stoves, and rag pickers' refuse in a garret in Pell Street?" Hallberg's hammer fell to the ground, but he picked it up and asked, with a great deal of calm, how I knew that the tassets and left cuissard were missing from the Prince's Emblazoned. I did not know until Mr. Wilde mentioned it to me the other day. He said they were in the garret of 998 Pell Street. Nonsense, he cried, but I noticed his hand trembling under his leather apron. Is this nonsense too? I asked pleasantly. Is it nonsense when Mr. Wilde continually speaks of you as the Marquis of Avonshire and of Miss Constance? I did not finish, for Constance had started to her feet with terror written on every feature. Hawberk looked at me and slowly smoothed his leathered apron. That is impossible. Mr. Wilde may know a great many things. About armor, for instance, and the princes emblazoned, I interposed, smiling. Yes, he continued slowly. About armor also. Maybe. But he is wrong in regard to the Marquis of Avonshire, who, as you know, killed his wife's traducer years ago and went to Australia, where he did not long survive his wife. Mr. Wilde is wrong, murmured Constance. Her lips were blanched, but her voice was sweet and calm. Let us agree, if you please, that in this one circumstance, Mr. Wilde is wrong, I said. I climbed the three dilapidated flights of stairs, which I had so often climbed before, and knocked at a small door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Wilde opened the door and I walked in. When he had double locked the door and pushed a heavy chest against it, he came and sat down beside me, peering up into my face with his little light-colored eyes. Half a dozen new scratches covered his nose and cheeks, and the silver wires which had supported his artificial ears had become displaced. I thought I had never seen him so hideously fascinating. He had no ears. The artificial ones, which now stood out at an angle from the fine wire, were his one weakness. They were made of wax and painted a shell pink, but the rest of his face was yellow. He might better have reveled in the luxury of some artificial fingers for his left hand, which was absolutely fingerless, but it seemed to cause him no inconvenience, and he was satisfied with his wax ears. He was very small, scarcely higher than a child of 10, but his arms were magnificently developed, and his thighs as thick as any athlete's. Still, the most remarkable thing about Mr. Wilde was that a man of his marvelous intelligence and knowledge should have such a head. It was flat and pointed, like the heads of many of those unfortunates whom people imprison in asylums for the weak-minded. Many called him insane, but I knew him to be as sane as I was. I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania he had for keeping that cat and teasing her until she flew at his face like a demon was certainly eccentric. I never could understand why he kept the creature, nor what pleasure he found in shutting himself up in his room with the surly, vicious beast. I remembered once glancing up from the manuscript I was studying by the light of some tallow dips and seeing Mr. Wilde squatting motionless on his high chair, his eyes fairly blazing with excitement, while the cat, which had risen from her place before the stove, came creeping across the floor right at him. Before I could move, she flattened her belly to the ground, crouched, trembled, and sprang into his face. Howling and foaming, they rolled over and over the floor, scratching and clawing, until the cat screamed and fled under the cabinet, and Mr. Wilde turned over on his back, his limbs contracting and curling up like the legs of a dying spider. He was eccentric. Mr. Wilde had climbed into his high chair, and after studying my face, picked up a dog's-eared ledger and opened it. Henry B. Matthews, he read, bookkeeper with Weiser Weissott and Company, dealers in church ornaments, called April 3rd, reputation damaged on the racetrack, known as a welcher. Reputation to be repaired by August 1st. Retainer $5. He turned the page and ran his fingerless knuckles down the closely written columns. P. Green Dunsonberry, minister of the gospel, Fair Beach, New Jersey. Reputation damaged in the Bowery, to be repaired as soon as possible. Retainer, $100. He coughed and added, called April 6th. Then you are not in need of money, Mr. Wilde, I inquired. Listen, he coughed again. Mrs. C. Hamilton Chester of Chester Park, New York City, called April 7th. Reputation damaged at Dieppe, France, to be repaired by October 1st. Retainer, $500. Note, C. Hamilton Chester, Captain, USS Avalanche, ordered home from South Sea Squadron, October 1st. Well, the profession of a repairer of reputations is lucrative. His colorless eyes sought mine. I only wanted to demonstrate that I was correct. You said it was impossible to succeed as a repairer of reputations, that even if I did succeed in certain cases, it would cost me more than I would gain by it. Today, I have 500 men in my employ who are poorly paid, but who pursue the work with an enthusiasm which possibly may be born of fear. These men enter every shade and grade of society. Some even are pillars of the most exclusive social temples. Others are the prop and pride of the financial world. Still others hold undisputed sway among the fancy and the talent. I choose them at my leisure from those who reply to my advertisements. It is easy enough. They are all cowards. I could treble the number in 20 days if I wished. So you see, those who have in their keeping the reputation of their fellow citizens, I have in my pay. They may turn on you, I suggested. He rubbed his thumb over his cropped ears and adjusted the wax substitutes. I think not, he murmured thoughtfully. I seldom have to apply the whip, and then only once. Besides, they like their wages. So basically, so this guy, this is like the tabloids before tabloids. He makes his living by having dirt and blackmail on the who's who among the New York elites, and will, at a cost, cover up stories for them. And he has a whole net, at least to his claim, is that he has a whole network of spies working for him. But again, this is Hildred telling us this. And he says that Mr. Wilde is just as sane as he is. So there is the possibility that Mr. Wilde is just as insane as Hildred. It'd always be just two dumb bitches looking at each other and just saying, exactly. How do you apply the whip? I demanded. His face for a moment was awful to look upon. His eyes dwindled to a pair of green sparks. I invite them to come and have a little chat with me, he said in a soft voice. A knock at the door interrupted him, and his face resumed its amiable expression. Who is it? He inquired. Mr. Stylet, was the answer. Come tomorrow, replied Mr. Wilde. Impossible, began the other, but was silenced by a sort of bark from Mr. Wilde. Come tomorrow, he repeated. We heard somebody move away from the door and turn the corner by the stairway. Who is that? I asked. Arnold Stylet, owner and editor-in-chief of the great New York Daily. He drummed on the ledger with his fingerless hand, adding, I pay him very badly, but he thinks it's a good bargain. Arnold Stylet, I repeated, amazed. Yes, said Mr. Wilde with a self-satisfied cough. The cat, which had entered the room as he spoke, hesitated, looked up at him, and snarled. He climbed down from the chair and, squatting on the floor, took the creature into his arms and caressed her. The cat ceased snarling and presently began a loud purring, which seemed to increase in timbre as he stroked her. Where are the notes? I asked. He pointed to the table, and for the 100th time, I picked up the bundle of manuscript entitled The Imperial Dynasty of America. One by one, I studied the well-worn pages, worn only by my own handling, and although I knew all by heart from the beginning, went from Carcosa, the Hyades, Hastur, and Aldebaran, to Castaigne, Louis de Cavaldos, born December 19th, 1877. I read it with an eager, rapt attention, pausing to repeat parts of it out loud, and dwelling especially on Hildred de Cavaldos, only son of Hildred Castaigne and Edith Landis Castaigne, first in succession, etc., etc. When I finished, Mr. Wilde nodded and coughed. Speaking of your legitimate ambition, how do Constance and Louis get along? She loves him, I replied simply. The cat on his knee suddenly turned and struck at his eyes, and he flung her off and climbed onto the chair opposite me. And Dr. Archer, But that's a matter you can settle any time you wish, he added. Yes, Dr. Archer can wait, but it is time I saw my cousin Lewis. It is time, he repeated. Then he took another ledger from the table and ran over the leaves rapidly. We are now in communication with 10,000 men, he muttered. We can count on 100,000 within the first 28 hours, and in 48 hours the state will rise in mass. The country follows the state, and the portion that will not, I mean California and the Northwest, might better never have been inhabited. I shall not send them the yellow sign. The blood rushed to my head, but I only answered, a new broom sweeps clean. The ambition of Caesar and Napoleon pales before that which could not rest until it had seized the minds of men and controlled even their unborn thoughts. We are speaking of the king in yellow, I groaned with a shudder. He is a king whom emperors have served. I am content to serve him, I replied. Mr. Wilde sat rubbing his ears with his crippled hand. Perhaps Constance does not love him, he suggested. I started to reply, but a sudden burst of military music from the street below drowned out my voice. The 20th Dragoon Regiment, formerly in garrison at Mount St. Vincent, was returning from the maneuvers in Westchester County to its new barracks on East Washington Square. It was my cousin's regiment. They were a fine lot of fellows in their pale blue, tight-fitting jackets, jaunty busbies, and white riding breeches with the double yellow stripe, into which their limbs seemed molded. Every other squadron was armed with lances, from the metal points of which fluttered yellow and white pennons. The band passed, playing the regimental march. Then came the colonel and staff, the horses crowding and trampling, while their heads bobbed in unison, and the pennons fluttered from their lance points. The troopers, who rode with the beautiful English seat, looked brown as berries from their bloodless campaign among the farms of Westchester, and the music of their sabers against the stirrups and the jingle of spurs and carbines was delightful to me. I saw Lewis riding with his squadron. He was as handsome an officer as I had ever seen. Mr. Wilde, who had mounted a chair by the window, saw him too, but said nothing. Lewis turned and looked straight at Hallbrook's shop as he passed, and I could see the flush on his brown cheeks. I think Constance must have been at the window. When the last troopers had clattered by and the last pennons vanished into South Fifth Avenue, Mr. Wilde dragged the chest away from the door. So you can see that the United States is not firmly under control of this new government. That is why we see this constant military presence and these constant military parades that are going on in New York. But it seems like the west end of the country, as Mr. Wilde had just said, like California and the Northwest haven't been united. So the United States is in a complete state of disarray after this great war. Yes, he said, it is time that you saw your cousin Lewis. He unlocked the door, and I picked up my hat and stick and stepped into the corridor. The stairs were dark. Groping about, I set my foot on something soft, which snarled and spit, and I aimed a murderous blow at the cat. But my cane shivered to splinters against the balustrade, and the beast scurried back into Mr. Wilde's room. Passing Hallbrook's door again, I saw him still at work on the armor, but I did not stop, and stepping out into Bleecker Street, I followed it to Wooster, skirted the grounds of the lethal chamber, and crossing Washington Park, went straight to my rooms in the Benedict. Here I lunched comfortably, read the Herald and the Meteor, and finally went to the steel safe in my bedroom and set the time combination. The 3 3/4 minutes which it is necessary to wait while the time lock is opening are to me golden moments. From the instant I set the combination to the moment when I grasp the knobs and swing back the solid steel doors, I live in an ecstasy of expectation. These moments must be like the moments passed in paradise. I know what I am to find at the end of the time limit. I know what the massive safe holds secure for me alone, and the exquisite pleasure of waiting is hardly enhanced when the safe opens and I lift from its velvet crown a diadem of purest gold, blazing with diamonds. I do this every day, and yet the joy of waiting and at last touching the diadem, only seems to increase as the days passed. It is a diadem fit for a king among kings, an emperor among emperors. The king in yellow might scorn it, but it shall be worn by his royal servant. I held it in my arms until the alarm on the safe rang harshly, and then tenderly, proudly, I replaced it and shut the steel doors. I walked slowly back into my study, which faces Washington Square, and leaned on the windowsill. The afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds and tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of the memorial church, sometimes alighting on the purple tiled roof, sometimes wheeling downward to the Lotto's fountain in front of the marble arch. The gardeners were busy with the flower beds around the fountain, and the freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. A lawnmower drawn by a fat white horse clinked across the green sward, and watering carts poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Around the statue of Peter Stuyvesant, which in 1897 had replaced the monstrosity supposed to represent Garibaldi, children played in the spring sunshine, and nurse girls wheeled elaborate baby carriages with a reckless disregard for the pasty-faced occupants, which could probably be explained by the presence of half a dozen trim dragoon troopers languidly lolling on the benches. Through the trees, the Washington Memorial Arch glistened like silver in the sunshine, and beyond, on the eastern extremity of the square, the gray stone barracks of the dragoons and the white granite artillery stables were alive with color and motion. I looked at the lethal chamber on the corner of the square opposite. A few curious people still lingered about the gilded iron railing, but inside the grounds the paths were deserted. I watched the fountains ripple and sparkle. The sparrows had already found this new bathing nook, and the basins were crowded with the dusty feathered little things. 2 or 3 white peacocks picked their way across the lawns, and a drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one of the fates that it seemed to be a part of the sculptured stone. As I was turning carelessly away, a slight commotion in the group of curious loiterers around the gates attracted my attention. A young man had entered and was advancing with nervous strides along the gravel path which leads to the bronze doors of the lethal chamber. He paused a moment before the fates, and as he raised his head to those 3 mysterious faces, the pigeon rose from its sculptured perch, circled about for a moment, and wheeled to the east. The young man pressed his hands to his face, and then with an undefinable gesture, sprang up the marble steps. The bronze doors closed behind him, and half an hour later, the loiterers slouched away, and the frightened pigeon returned to its perch in the arms of fate. So this thing has only been open for a few hours at most, and already people are using it. But again, nobody's going to use this. The government is so sure that nobody is going to use these suicide booths. I put on my hat and went out into the park for a little walk before dinner. As I crossed the central driveway, a group of officers passed, and one of them called out, "Hello, Hildred," and came back to shake hands with me. It was my cousin Lewis, who stood smiling and tapping his spurred heels with his riding whip. "Just back from Westchester," he said. "Been doing the bucolic, milking curds, you know, dairy maids in sunbonnets who say how and I don't think when you tell them that they are pretty. I'm nearly dead for a square meal at Delmonico's. What's the news?" "There is none," I replied pleasantly. "I saw your regiment coming in this morning." "Did you? I didn't see you. Where were you?" "In Mr. Wilde's window." "Oh, hell," he began impatiently. "That man is stark mad. I don't understand why you—" He saw how annoyed I felt by this outburst and begged my pardon. "Really, old chap, I don't mean to run down a man you like, but for the life of me, I don't see what the deuce you find in common with Mr. Wilde. He's not well bred, to put it generously. He's hideously deformed. His head is the head of a criminally insane person. You know yourself he's been in an asylum." "So have I interrupted calmly. Lewis looked startled and confused for a moment, but recovered and slapped me heartily on the shoulder. "You were completely cured," he began, but I stopped him again. I suppose you mean that I was simply acknowledged never to have been insane. Of course, that's what I meant, he laughed. I disliked his laugh because I knew it was forced, but I nodded gaily and asked him where he was going. Lewis looked after his brother officers who had now almost reached Broadway. We had intended to sample a Brunswick cocktail, but to tell you the truth, I was anxious for an excuse to go and see Hallberg instead. Come along, I'll make you my excuse. We found old Hallberg, neatly attired in a fresh spring suit, standing at the door of his shop and sniffing the air. I had just decided to take Constance for a little stroll before dinner, he replied to the impetuous volley of questions from Lewis. We thought of walking on the park terrace along the North River. At that moment, Constance appeared and grew pale and rosy by turns as Lewis bent over her small gloved fingers. I tried to excuse myself, alleging an engagement uptown, but Lewis and Constance would not listen, and I saw I was expected to remain and engage old Hallberg's attention. After all, it would be just as well if I kept my eye on Lewis, I thought, and when they hailed a Spring Street horse car, I got in after them and took my seat beside the armorer. The beautiful line of parks and granite terraces overlooking the wharves along the North River, which were built in 1910 and finished in the autumn of 1917, had become one of the most popular promenades of the metropolis. They extended from the Battery to 190th Street, overlooking the Noble River and affording a fine view of the Jersey Shore and the highlands opposite. Cafes and restaurants were scattered here and there among the trees, and twice a week, military bands from the garrison played in the kiosks on the parapets. We sat down in the sunshine on the bench at the foot of the equestrian statue of General Sheridan. Constance tipped her sunshade to shield her eyes, and she and Lewis began a murmuring conversation which was impossible to catch. Old Hallberg, leaning on his ivory-headed cane, lighted an excellent cigar, the mate to which I politely refused, and smiled at vacancy. The sun hung low above the Staten Island woods, and the bay was dyed with golden hues reflected from the sun-warmed sails of the shipping in the harbor. Brigs, schooners, yachts, clumsy ferret boats, these decks swarming with people, railroad transports carrying lines of brown, blue, and white freight cars, stately sound steamers, the Classe tramp steamers, coasters, dredgers, scows, and everywhere pervading the entire bay, impudent little tugs puffing and whistling officiously. These were the crafts which churned the sunlit waters as far as the eye could reach. In calm contrast to the hurry of sailing vessel and steamer, a silent fleet of white warships lay motionless in midstream. Constance's merry laugh aroused me from my reverie. "What are you staring at?" she inquired. "Nothing. The fleet," I smiled. Then Lewis told us what the vessels were, pointing out each by its relative position to the old red fort on Governor's Island. "The little cigar-shaped thing is the torpedo boat," he explained. "There are 4 more lying close together. They are the Tarpon, the Falcon, the Sea Fox, and the Octopus. The gunboats just above are the Princeton, the Champlain, the Stillwater, and the Erie. Next to them lie the cruisers, Farragut and Los Angeles, and above them the battleships California and Dakota, and the Washington, which is the flagship. Those 2 squatty-looking chunks of metal, which are anchored there off Castle William, are the double-turreted monitors, Terrible and Magnificent. Behind them lies the ram, Osceola." Constance looked at him with deep approval in her beautiful eyes. "What loads of things you know for a soldier," she said, and we all joined in the laugh which followed. Presently, Lewis rose with a nod to us and offered his arm to Constance, and they strolled away along the river wall. Hallberg watched for a moment and then turned to me. "Mr. Wilde was right," he said. "I have found the missing tassets and left Quaysert of the Princes Emblazoned in a vile old junk garret in Pell Street." "998?" I inquired with a smile. "Yes." "Mr. Wilde is a very intelligent man," I observed. "I want to give him credit of this most important discovery," continued Hallberg, "and I intend it shall be known that he is entitled to the fame of it." "He won't thank you for that," I answered sharply. "Please say nothing about it." "Do you know what it is worth?" said Hallberg. "No. $50, perhaps." "It is valued at $500, but the owner of the Prince's Emblazoned will give $2,000 to the person who completes the suit. That reward also belongs to Mr. Wilde. He doesn't want it. He refuses, I answered angrily. What do you know about Mr. Wilde? He doesn't need the money. He is rich, or will be, richer than any living man except myself. What will we care for money then? And what will we care, he and I, when? When what? Demanded Hallberg. You will see, I replied, on my guard again. He looked at me narrowly, much as Dr. Archer used to, and I knew he thought I was mentally unsound. Perhaps it was fortunate for him that he did not use the word lunatic just then. No, I replied to his unspoken thought. I am not mentally weak. My mind is as healthy as Mr. Wilde's. I do not care to explain just yet what I have on hand, but it is an investment which will pay more than mere gold, silver, and precious stones. It will secure the happiness and prosperity of a continent. Yes, a hemisphere. Oh, said Hallberg. And eventually, it will secure the happiness of the whole world. And incidentally, your own happiness and prosperity as well as Mr. Wilde's. Exactly, I smiled. But I could have throttled him for taking that tone. He looked at me in silence for a while and then said very gently, Why don't you give up your books and studies, Mr. Castaigne, and take a tramp among the mountains somewhere or other? You used to be fond of fishing. Take a cast or two at the trout in the Rangsley. I don't care for fishing anymore, I answered, without a shade of annoyance in my voice. You used to be fond of everything, he continued. Athletics, yachting, shooting, riding. I have never cared to ride since my fall, I said quietly. Oh, yes, your fall, he repeated, looking away from me. I thought this nonsense had gone far enough, so I turned the conversation back to Mr. Wilde, and he was scanning my face again in a manner highly offensive to me. Mr. Wilde, do you know what he did this afternoon? He came downstairs and nailed a sign over the hall door next to mine. It read, Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputations, third bell. Do you know what a repairer of reputations can be? I do, I replied, suppressing the rage within. Oh, he said again. Lewis and Constance came strolling by and stopped to ask if we would join them. Hallberg looked at his watch. At the same moment, a puff of smoke shot from the casements of Castle William, and the boom of the sunset gun rolled across the water and was re-echoed from the highlands opposite. The flag came running down from the flagpole. The bugle sounded on the white decks of the warships, and the first electric lights sparkled out from the Jersey shore. As I turned into the city with Hallberg, I heard Constance murmur something to Lewis, which I did not understand, but Lewis whispered, my darling, in reply. And again, walking ahead with Hallberg, through the square, I heard a murmur of sweetheart and my own Constance. And I knew the time had nearly arrived when I should speak of important matters with my cousin Lewis. One morning, early in May, I stood before the steel safe in my bedroom, trying on the golden jeweled crown. The diamonds flashed fire as I turned to the mirror, and the heavy beaten gold burned like a halo about my head. I remembered Camilla's agonized scream and the awful words echoing through the streets of Carcosa. They were the last lines in the first act, and I dared not think of what followed. Dared not, even in the spring sunshine, there in my own room, surrounded with familiar objects, reassured by the bustle from the street and the voices of the servants in the hallway outside. For those poison words had dropped slowly into my heart, as death sweat drops upon a bedsheet and is absorbed. Trembling, I put the diadem from my head and wiped my forehead. But I thought of Hastur and of my own rightful ambition, and I remembered Mr. Wilde as I had last left him, his face all torn and bloody from the claws of that devil's creature, and what he said. Ah, what he said. The alarm bell in the safe began to whir harshly, and I knew my time was up. But I would not heed it, and replacing the flashing circlet upon my head, I turned defiantly to the mirror. I stood for a long time, absorbed in the changing expression of my own eyes. The mirror reflected a face which was like my own, but whiter and so thin that I hardly recognized it. and all the time I kept repeating between my clenched teeth, "The day has come. The day has come," while the alarm in the safe whirred and clamored, and the diamonds sparked and flamed above my brow. I heard a door open, but did not heed it. It was only when I saw two faces in the mirror. It was only when another face rose over my shoulder, and two other eyes met mine. I wheeled like a flash and seized a long knife from the dressing table, and my cousin sprang back very pale, crying, "Hildred, for God's sake!" And then as my hand fell, he said, "It is I, Lewis. Don't you know me?" I stood silent. I could have not spoken for my life. He walked up to me and took the knife from my hand. "What is all this?" he inquired. "Are you ill?" "No," I replied, but I doubt if he heard me. "Come, come, old fellow," he cried. "Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. Are you going to a masquerade? What's all this theatrical tinsel anyway?" I was glad he thought the crown was made of brass and paste, yet I didn't like him any better for thinking so. I let him take it from my hand, knowing it was best to humor him. He tossed the splendid diadem in the air and, catching it, turned to me smiling. "It's dear at 50 cents. What's it for?" I did not answer, but took the circlet from his hand and, placing it in the safe, shut the massive steel door. The alarm ceased its infernal din at once. He watched me curiously, but did not seem to notice the sudden ceasing of the alarm. He did, however, speak of the safe as a biscuit box. Fearing lest he might examine the combination, I led the way into the study. Lewis threw himself onto the sofa and flicked at flies with his eternal riding whip. He wore his fatigue uniform with the braided jacket and jaunty cap, and I noticed that his riding boots were all splashed with red mud. "Where have you been?" I inquired. "Jumping mud creeks in Jersey," he said. "I haven't had time to change yet. I was rather in a hurry to see you. Haven't you got a glass of something? I'm dead tired. Been in the saddle 24 hours. I gave him some brandy from my medicinal store, which he drank with a grimace. "Damned bad stuff," he observed. "I'll give you an address where they sell brandy that is brandy." "It's good enough for my needs," I said indifferently. "I used it to rub my chest with." He stared and flicked at another fly. "See here, old fellow, I've got something to suggest to you. It's 4 years now that you've shut yourself up in here like an owl, never going anywhere, never taking any healthy exercise, never doing a damn thing but poring over those books up there on the mantelpiece." He glanced along the rows of shelves. "Napoleon, Napoleon, Napoleon," he read. "For heaven's sakes, have you nothing but Napoleon there?" "I wish they were bound in gold," I said. "But wait, yes, there is another book, The King in Yellow." I looked him steadily in the eye. "Have you ever read it?" I asked. "I? No, thank God, I don't want to be driven crazy." I saw he regretted his speech as soon as he had uttered it. There is only one word which I loathe more than I do lunatic, and that word is crazy. But I controlled myself and asked him why he thought The King in Yellow dangerous. "Oh, I don't know," he said hastily. "I only remember the excitement it created and the denunciations from pulpit and press. I believe the author shot himself after bringing forth this monstrosity, didn't he?" "I understand he is still alive," I answered. "That's probably true," he muttered. Bullets couldn't kill a fiend like that." "It is a book of great truths," I said. "Yes," he replied, "of truths which send men frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing is, as they say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have written it, and I, for one, shall never open its pages." "Is that what you have come to tell me?" I asked. "No," he said. "I came to tell you that I'm going to be married." I believe for a moment my heart ceased to beat, but I kept my eyes on his face. "Yes," he continued, smiling happily, "married to the sweetest girl on earth." "Constance Hawberk," I said mechanically. "How did you know?" he cried, astonished. "I didn't know it myself until that evening last April when we strolled down to the embankment before dinner." "When is it to be?" I asked. "It was to have been next September, but an hour ago a dispatch came ordering our regiment to the Presidio, San Francisco. We leave at noon tomorrow." Tomorrow, he repeated. Just think, Hildred, tomorrow I shall be the happiest fellow that ever drew breath in this jolly world, for Constance will go with me. I offered him my hand in congratulation, and he seized and shook it like the good-natured fool he was, or pretended to be. I am going to get my squadron as a wedding present, he rattled on. Captain and Mrs. Louis Castaigne, eh, Hildred? Then he told me where it was to be and who were to be there, and made me promise to come and be best man. I set my teeth and listened to his boyish chatter without showing what I felt, but I was getting to the limit of my endurance. And when he jumped up and switching his spurs until they jingled said he must go, I did not detain him. There's one thing I want to ask of you, I said quietly. Out with it, it's promised, he laughed. I want you to meet me for a quarter of an hour's talk tonight. Of course, if you wish, he said, somewhat puzzled. Where? Anywhere in the park there. What time, Hildred? Midnight. What in the... He began, but checked himself and laughed assented. I watched him go down the stairs and hurry away, his saber banging at every stride. He turned into Bleecker Street, and I knew he was going to see Constance. I gave him 10 minutes to disappear and then followed in his footsteps, taking with me the jeweled crown and the silken robe embroidered with the yellow sign. When I turned into Bleecker Street and entered the doorway, which bore the sign, Mr. Wilde, Repairer of Reputation's third bell. I saw old Hawbark moving about in his shop, and I imagined I had heard Constance's voice in the parlor, but I avoided them both and hurried up the trembling stairways to Mr. Wilde's apartment. I knocked and entered without ceremony. Mr. Wilde lay groaning on the floor, his face covered with blood, his clothes torn to shreds. Drops of blood were scattered about over the carpet, which had also been ripped and frayed in the evidently recent struggle. It's that cursed cat, he said, ceasing his groans and turning his colorless eyes to me. She attacked me while I was asleep. I believe she will kill me yet. This was too much, so I went into the kitchen and, seizing a hatchet from the pantry, started to find the infernal beast and settle her then and there. My search was fruitless, and after a while I gave it up and came back to find Mr. Wilde squatting on his high chair by the table. He had washed his face and changed his clothes. The great furrows which the cat's claws had plowed up in his face he had filled with collidin, and a rag hid the wound in his throat. I told him I should kill the cat when I came across her, but he only shook his head and turned to the open ledger before him. He read name after name of the people who had come to him in regard to their reputation, and the sums he had amassed were startling. I put the screws on now and then, he explained. One day or other, some of these people will assassinate you, I insisted. Do you think so? He said, rubbing his mutilated ears. It was useless to argue with him, so I took down the manuscript entitled Imperial Dynasty of America for the last time I should ever take it down in Mr. Wilde's study. I read it through, thrilling and trembling with pleasure. When I had finished, Mr. Wilde took the manuscript back then, turning to the dark passage which leads from his study to his bedchamber, called out in a loud voice, Vance! Then, for the first time, I noticed a man crouching there in the shadow. How I had overlooked him during my search for the cat, I cannot imagine. Vance, come in, cried Mr. Wilde. The figure rose and crept towards us, and I shall never forget the face that he raised to mine as the light from the window illuminated it. Vance, this is Mr. Castaigne, said Mr. Wilde. Before he finished speaking, the man threw himself on the ground before the table, crying and gasping. Oh, God! Oh, my God! Forgive me! Oh, Mr. Castaigne, keep that man away! You cannot mean it! You are different! Save me! I am broken down. I was in a madhouse, and now, when all was coming right, when I had forgotten the king in yellow, but I shall go mad again. I shall go mad. His voice died into a choking rattle, for Mr. Wilde had leapt on him, and his right hand encircled the man's throat. When Vance fell in a heap on the floor, Mr. Wilde clambered nimbly into his chair again, and rubbing his mangled ears with the stump of his hand, turned to me and asked me for the ledger. I reached it down from the shelf, and he opened it. After a moment's searching among the beautifully written pages, He coughed complacently and pointed to the name Vance. Vance, he read aloud. Osgood Oswald Vance. At the sound of his name, the man on the floor raised his head and turned a convulsed face to Mr. Wilde. His eyes were injected with blood, his lips tumefied. Called April 28th, continued Mr. Wilde. Occupation, cashier in the Seaforth National Bank. Has served a term for forgery at Sing Sing, from whence he was transferred to the asylum for the criminally insane. Pardoned by the governor of New York and discharged from the asylum January 19th, 1918. Reputation damaged at Sheepshead's Bay. Rumors that he lives beyond his income. Reputation to be repaired at once. Retainer, $1,500. Note, has embezzled sums amounting to $20,000 since March 20th, 1919. Excellent family and secured present position through uncle's influence. Father, president of Seaforth Bank. I looked at the man on the floor. Get up, Vance, said Mr. Wilde in a gentle voice. Vance rose as if hypnotized. He will do as we suggest now, observed Mr. Wilde. And opening the manuscript, he read the entire history of the imperial dynasty of America. Then, in a kind and soothing manner, he ran over the important points with Vance, who stood like one stunned. His eyes were so blank and vacant that I imagined he had become half-witted, and remarked it to Mr. Wilde, who replied that it was of no consequence anyway. Very patiently, we pointed out to Vance that what his share in the affair would be, and he seemed to understand after a while. Mr. Wilde explained the manuscript, using several volumes on heraldry to substantiate the result of his researches. He mentioned the establishment of the dynasty in Carcosa, the lake which connected Hastur, Aldebaran, and the mystery of the Hyades. He spoke of Casilda and Camilla, and sounded the cloudy depths of Demhe and the lake of Hawley. The scallop tatters and king in yellow must hide ye till forever, he muttered, but I do not believe Vance heard him. Then by degrees he led Vance along the ramifications of the imperial family to Aut and Thale, from Altalba and the Phantom of Truth to Aldonis, and then tossing aside his manuscript and notes, he began the wonderful story of the last king. Fascinated and thrilled, I watched him. He threw up his head. His long arms were stretched out in a magnificent gesture of pride and power, and his eyes blazed deep in their sockets like two emeralds. Vance listened, stupefied. As for me, when at last Mr. Wilde had finished and pointing to me cried, "The cousin of the king!" my head swam with excitement. Controlling myself with a superhuman effort, I explained to Vance why I alone was worthy of the crown and why my cousin must be exiled or die. I made him understand that my cousin must never marry, even after denouncing all his claims, and how that least of all he should marry the daughter of the Marquis of Avonshire and bring England into the question. I showed him a list of thousands of names which Mr. Wilde had drawn up. Every man whose name was there had received the yellow sign, which no living human being dared disregard. The city, the state, the whole land were ready to rise and tremble before the pallid mask. The time had come. The people should know the son of Hastur, and the whole world bow to the black stars which hang in the sky over Carcosa. Vance leaned on the table, his head buried in his hands. Mr. Wilde drew a rough sketch on the margin of yesterday's Herald with a bit of lead pencil. It was a plan of Hallbark's rooms. Then he wrote out the order and affixed the seal, and shaking like a palsied man, I signed my first writ of execution with my name, Hildred Rex. Mr. Wilde clambered to the floor and, unlocking the cabinet, took a long square box from the first shelf. Then he brought to the table and opened. A new knife lay in the tissue paper inside, and I picked it up and handed it to Vance, along with the order and the plan of Hallbark's apartment. Then Mr. Wilde told Vance he could go, and he went, shambling like an outcast of the slums. I sat for a while, watching the daylight fade behind the square tower of the Judson Memorial Church, and finally, gathering up the manuscript and notes, took my hat and started for the door. Mr. Wilde watched me in silence. When I had stepped into the hall, I looked back at Mr. Wilde's small eyes were still fixed on me. Behind him, the shadows gathered in the fading light. Then I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. I had eaten nothing since breakfast, but I was not hungry. A wretched, half-starved creature who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber noticed me and came up to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money. I don't know why, and he went away without thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced the yellow sign, and I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then, with an uncertain glance at me, folded it with what seemed to me exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the trees, and the new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wandered from the Marble Arch to the artillery stables and back again to the lotus fountain. The flowers and grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountain played in the moonlight, and the musical clash of falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chained mail in Hallbrook's shop. But it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparkle of the moonlight on the water brought no such sensation of exquisite pleasure as when the sunshine played over the polished steel of a corselet on Hallbrook's knee. I watched the bats darting and turning above the water plants in the fountain basin, but their rapid, jerky flight set my nerves on edge, and I went away again to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks, the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted, and the sally port was constantly filled with troopers in fatigue, carrying straw and harness and baskets filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry at the gates was changed. While I wandered up and down the asphalt walk, I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The lights in the barracks went out one by one. The barred gate was closed, and every minute or two an officer passed in through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs on the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterer had been driven away by the gray-coated park policemen. The car tracks along Wooster Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness was the stamping of the sentry's horse and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted, and military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire of St. Francis Xavier, and at the last stroke of the sad tone bell, a figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis, returned the salute of the sentry, and crossing the street, entered the square and advanced toward the Benedict apartment house. "Lewis," I called. The man pivoted on his spurred heels and came straight toward me. "Is that you, Hildred?" "Yes, you were on time." I took his offered hand, and we strolled toward the lethal chamber. He rattled on about his wedding and the graces of Constance and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's shoulder straps and the triple gold arabesque on his sleeve and fatigue cap. I believe I listened as much to the music of his spurs and saber as I did to his boyish babble. And at last we stood under the elms on the 4th Street corner of the square, opposite the lethal chamber. Then he laughed and asked me what I wanted with him. I motioned him to a seat on a bench under the electric light and sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously with that same searching glance which I hate and fear so in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know it, and I carefully concealed my feelings. "Well, old chap," he inquired, "what can I do for you?" I drew from my pocket the manuscript and notes of the Imperial Dynasty of America, and looking him in the eye said, "I will tell you. On your word as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end without asking me a question. Promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell later." "I promise if you wish it," he said pleasantly. "Give me the paper, Hildred." He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air, which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyebrows contracted, and his lips seemed to form the word, rubbish. Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently for my sake read, with an attempt at interest, which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when in the closely written pages he came to his own name, and when he came to mine, he lowered the paper and looked sharply at me for a moment. But he kept his word and resumed his reading, and I let the half-formed question die on his lips unanswered. When he came to the end and read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigue cap up to his forehead with a boyish gesture, which I remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read, and when he finished, I took the notes with the manuscript and placed them in my pocket. Then I unfolded a scroll marked with the yellow sign. He saw the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it, and I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. "It is the yellow sign," I said angrily. "Oh, that's it, is it?" said Lewis in that flattering voice Dr. Archer used to employ with me, and would probably have employed again had I not settled his affair for him. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. "Listen, you have engaged your word." "I am listening, old chap," he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. "Dr. Archer, having by some means become possessed of the secret of the imperial succession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his own house in hopes of either driving me insane or in poisoning me. I have not forgotten it. I visited him last night and the interview was final." Lewis turned quite pale, but did not move. I resumed triumphantly. "There are yet 3 people to be interviewed in the interests of Mr. Wilde and myself. They are my cousin Lewis, Mr. Hallberg, and his daughter Constance." Lewis sprang to his feet, and I arose also, and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. "Oh, I don't need that to tell you what I have to say," I cried with a laugh of triumph. "You must renounce the crown to me, do you hear? To me!" Lewis looked at me with a startled air, but recovering himself said kindly, "Of course, I renounce the—" "What is it I must renounce?" "The crown," I said angrily. "Of course, I renounce it. Come, old chap, I'll walk back to your rooms with you." "Don't try any of your doctor's tricks on me," I cried, trembling with fury. "Don't act as if you think I'm insane." "What nonsense. Come, it's getting late, Hildred. No, you must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear me? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile, but if you refuse, you shall die." He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat opened, and I laughed in his face when I thought of Vance and his knife and the order signed by me. "Ah, you are the king," I cried, "but I shall be king. Who are you to keep me from empire over all the habitable earth? I was born the cousin of a king, but I shall be king." Lewis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up 4th Street, entered the gate of the Lethal Temple, traversed the path to the bronze doors at full speed, and plunged into the death chamber with the cry of one demented. And I laughed until I wept tears, for I had recognized Vance, and knew that Hallberg and his daughter were no longer in my way. "Go," I cried to Lewis. "You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now, and if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you as I did my doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow." Then I turned and darted into South 5th Avenue, and with a cry of terror, Lewis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into the doorway under Hallberg's sign. He cried, "Halt, or I fire!" But when he saw that I flew up the stairs leaving Hallberg's shop below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at their door as though it were possible to rouse the dead. Mr. Wilde's door was open, and I entered crying. It is done. It is done. Let the nations rise and look upon their king. But I could not find Mr. Wilde. So I went to the cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe embroidered with the yellow sign and placed the crown upon my head. Okay. He is the king. He is the king. At last I was king. King by my right in Hastur. King because I knew the mystery of the Hyades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the lake of Holly. I was king. The first gray pencilings at dawn would raise a tempest which would shake 2 hemispheres. Then, as I stood, my every nerve pitched to the highest tension, faint with the joy and splendor of my thoughts. Without, in the dark passage, a man groaned. I seized the tallow dip and sprang out to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out. But my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard her screech, and I knew that my knife had found her. For a moment I listened to her tumbling and thumping about in the darkness, and then when her frenzy ceased, I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor with his throat torn open. At first I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came into his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment, my terror and despair gave place to hope, but as I bent over him, his eyeballs rolled clean around in his head, and he died. Then, while I stood transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and every ambition, my very life lying prostrate there with the dead master, they came, seized me from behind, and bound me until my veins stood out like cords, and my voice failed with paroxysms of my frenzied screams. But I still raged, bleeding and infuriated among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Hallbark, and behind him my cousin Lewis's ghastly face, and farther away in the corner a woman, Constance, weeping softly. I see it now, I shrieked. You have seized the throne and the empire. Woe, woe to you who are crowned with the crown of the King in Yellow. Editor's note, Mr. Castaigne died yesterday in the asylum for the criminally insane. And that is the opening story of The King in Yellow. And that sets the tone for exactly what's going to happen in the remainder of the stories. And again, the fact that we have a very mentally unwell person as our narrator is the thing that makes us question how much of this is all real. Is the King in Yellow even real? Or is this all just madness? But you can see why writers like Lovecraft would gravitate towards this, and why they would start incorporating elements of this sort of this cosmic dread into their stories. And then over the years, it would be taken a step further, and the name Hastur is applied. It becomes a great old one. The King in Yellow is his earthly avatar, but other writers will continue on with this, and that's where we get to our final story. So while some writers would choose to continue on with the Lovecraft path of Hastur being a eldritch entity, others would rather focus more on the Carcosa mythos. And then, of course, there are others writers, and this is where we start to get where George and the more modern writers start to come in, who blend elements of both, where the king, where you have both the King in Yellow as a king among kings, but also as an eldritch entity, where the play and the city of Carcosa, but also the Red Star of Aldebaran, where they all go hand in hand. Lynn Carter was great at that, and that's what led to Tatters of the King, which becomes a campaign in the Call of Cthulhu tabletop role-playing game. It's also these elements of Hastur and the King in Yellow that find their way into like Dungeons and Dragons and all these other games that guys like big nerdy writers like George are familiar with. And then other writers would try and focus more on the play, and we get to James Blish, and this is the last story we're going to read, which is More Light, where Blish attempts to actually write the play. Now, obviously, you can't make a play that's going to open the interstice and bring out a malevolent deity. The play, if written and performed, is never going to hold up to the mythos that Chambers had crafted. Just in the way that people earlier had asked, like, do you think we're ever going to see a Shy in the main series? No. I think the mystery is the whole point. But that doesn't stop people from trying, right? Which is why I think that, yeah, if we do see a Shy, it's not going to be in the main series, but it's going to be in the sort of side stories, like the Coreless Nine Voyages show that's in production. This is all HBO exclusives, which while they are building upon the world that George created, these are going to be, original stories told by new writers. And it's okay, like unlike Ryan Condal, it's going to be okay for them to play around with things and take liberties, because George is only given the bare bones, and I don't think he ever is going to go out in these worlds. He's just going to give them outlines and notes for these kinds of things. Yeah, super chats. I was engrossed in the story and wasn't really paying attention to the chats. 450 joules, foam finger. I'll have to find the chats. Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed any super chats. 200 joules, sunshine. And the Uncle Alert. Yeah, let's look at. I guess it's too far up. But if you want to repeat what you said, I'll find it then. But in the meantime, yeah, we're gonna move on to More Light, and this is James Blish, who's one of the later writers in this whole thing, comes about in this. And More Light is a story that comes out in 1970, and it also has its own bit of like baggage attached to it, I guess we could say. I did mention it in the Roads to Carcosa video, but I was being purposely flippant with it. And that is a revelation in Blish's story that Casilda and the imperial family of Carcosa are black, and that the play is meant for black actors, except for the role of the king himself, who is supposed to be the only white actor. Now, Blish wrote this at the height of the civil rights movement. And the interpretation I've come to is that what he was doing by having this is that it was a ham-fisted attempt on his part to be both inclusive yet also provocative for the time, to say that the imperial family was black. And it's also a subversion of some of Lovecraft's more racist stories, stuff like the Horror at Red Hook or Medusa's Coil. In Medusa's Coil, the revelation that the Gorgon Marceline was black is played up as being the big scary moment. So what Blish is doing is he's subverting that in this story. It's also why, like, I wish that it makes me sad that HBO didn't continue on with Lovecraft Country or adaptations of more modern Lovecraft stories like the Ballad of Black Tom, which sort of look at these. They take Lovecraft's racism, acknowledge it, but sort of turn it on its head in order to trying to separate the unpleasantness of it from Lovecraft, but still enjoy the world that he created and all that he had to offer, right? Because we can talk on and on about Lovecraft's racism, but there's no denying that he contributed a lot to the world of literature. I mean, you Lovecraftian horror, right? You don't get an entire genre named after you unless you were very important, no matter what your flaws were. And I think that is what James Blish is doing in this story. But again, it's only one line. It's one line that stands out, but it is done with purpose. So, I have never trusted Bill Athling. Like me, he has a mean streak in him. And I don't say so just because he once tore a story of mine to shreds in a review. That's what critics are for. But perhaps for the same reason, I also rather like him. Hence, when I first saw him again in New York, after I'd spent 2 years in exile lobbying before Senate committees, I was shocked. My instant impression was that he was dying. I thought at first that it was only the effect of a new beard, which was then just 2 weeks old and would have made any man look scruffy. And in part it was, for surprisingly, the beard was coming out white, though Bill is only 47 and is gray only at the temples. But there was more to it than that. He had lost some 20 or 30 pounds, which he could ill afford since he never weighed more than 150 at his best and stood 5'10" or so. His skin was gray, his neck crepey, his hands trembling, his eyes bleached, his cough tubercular. He stared constantly over my shoulder while we talked, and his voice kept fading out in the middle of sentences. If he was not seriously ill, then he had taken even more seriously to the bottle, which wasn't a pleasant thought either. This was hardly the shape in which I had expected to find a man with a new young wife, the artist Samantha Brock, and a fine new house in Brooklyn Heights. It had once been a gay 90s house of ill fame, and Samantha had decorated it in that style. Red plush, beaded curtains, crystal light fixtures, gold spray on the capitals of Corinthian wooden pillars, an ancient Victrola with a horn in the parlor, all very camp. But I made as light of it as I could manage. You look terrible, I told him over the brandy. What in God's name have you been doing to yourself? Reading the complete works of Sam Moskowitz? Or have you taken up LSD? He came back with his usual maddening indirection. At least that hadn't changed. What do you know about Robert W. Chambers? He said, looking off to the left. Damn little, I'm glad to say. I read some of his stuff when I was in college. As I recall, he liked his stories about his art student days in Paris better than the fantasies. But that isn't saying much. Then you remember The King in Yellow. Vaguely. It was one of the first semi-hoaxes, wasn't it? An imaginary book. People who read it were supposed to go mad or visited by monsters or things like that, like the Necronomicon. As a matter of fact, it was supposed to have been a play, Athling said. But go on. You're a pedant to the last. But there's nothing to go on about. Nobody can believe anymore that a book could drive anybody mad. Real life's become too horrible. Not even William Burroughs can top Dachau. Suddenly, I was overcome with suspicion and something very like disgust. Sour Bill Athling, you are about to tell me you found the play in your cellar and that you've been haunted ever since, and then pony up a concocted manuscript to prove it. If that's the case, I'll just throw up my dinner and go home. You know damn well it'll never sell anyhow. It was you who asked me what was wrong with me, he said reasonably enough. Simmer down. If you don't want to credit my explanation, then the burden of concocting another one falls on you. Concocting? If you can't stop squeaking, you might as well go home. All right. Observe me. I am breathing evenly. Now, is this honestly the explanation you're about to offer me? Yes, Atheling said. I do, in fact, have the play. I sat back, completely at a loss. Nobody peddles such nonsense anymore. And at last I said, I think the decor around here has gone to your head. Well, go on, I'll listen. Just don't expect me to be taken in. Who wrote this dreadful work, as if I didn't know? You don't know, and neither do I, but I'm pretty sure it was Chambers himself. It's interesting that you mentioned the Necronomicon without any prompting, because it was through Lovecraft that I got the play in the first place, which also explains why I hadn't read it until last year. But I'd better give you the story in sequence. Come upstairs with me. He got up, and I followed him, not failing to pick up the Grand Marnier bottle as I passed it. Atheling's office was almost always pathologically neat, another trait that, in a writer, automatically inspires mistrust in me. But it had been recently painted a brilliant chrome yellow with a faint bilious trace of green in it, a scheme which would have driven me out of my mind in short order, with no help needed from any imaginary play. There was a Vermeer reproduction on one wall, which against all that flat yellow paint looked almost exactly like a window, except that it had in it a window of its own, which looked even realer. I was surprised. In this atmosphere, I would have expected a parish, or maybe even a Bach. Atheling pointed me to the straight and inhospitable-looking chair, and then produced from a 4-drawer file cabinet a fairly thick folder, which he brought back to his desk. From this, in turn, he extracted 2 small sheets of blue paper, closely covered with tiny handwriting in dark blue pen. Is that it? Or are those just the commercials? No, that's not it, he said in a rather dangerously flat tone of voice. Just shut up for 10 seconds and listen, Jim, will you? If you keep on nattering, I may run out of guts. I'm none too sure as it is that I ought to be talking to you. Then why do you bother? You know damn well I won't believe a word you say, because you're just slightly less stupid than anybody else I know, and once upon a time knew something about magic. Now are you going to listen? Fire at will, I said with spurious resignation. I really could not imagine how even Atheling could make a good story out of such a stock opening, but I was thoroughly interested in hearing him try it, as of course he knew as well as I did. All right. I was a Lovecraft fan when I was a kid, as you probably know. So were you. And I believed devoutly in all those spurious books that he and the other members of the Cthulhu Circle concocted to make their tales sound more plausible. I was completely taken in. I wrote to the Widener Library to try to borrow a copy of the Necronomicon. I looked for it in secondhand bookstores. I tried to buy it in a plain sealed wrapper from Panurge Press. Nothing worked. So finally, this was when I was 15 years old, I wrote to Lovecraft himself for help. Well, you can guess what happened. He politely told me that he had invented the book. But at 15, I wasn't easily dashed. Instead, I proposed that, since the book didn't exist, he should write it, and I would publish it. In installments, of course, in some sort of amateur magazine. I laughed. He must have gotten 200 letters like that. I don't doubt it. In any event, he declined, very politely, of course. He said he had already quoted the Necronomicon from pages well beyond 900 or 1,000, and he didn't really think he wanted to undertake writing a volume of that size. Well, I more or less took the hint, but I couldn't prevent myself from adding that I'd hoped he'd get around to writing at least a few chapters someday, and if he did, well, Willie Atheling hoped he would remember who stood ready to publish it. I was a terrible little snot in those days. Please don't add any footnotes, because here is one of my own. He handed me one of the sheets of blue notepaper. I have seen Lovecraft holographs before. This one, with its tiny, utterly legible handwriting, which looked as though it had been constructed along a straight edge, was either the real thing or it had been made by a master forger, a talent I was pretty sure Atheling lacked. Atheling pointed to one long paragraph which read as follows. Your persistence is flattering indeed, but I really do think that for me to write more than a few sentences of the Necronomicon here and there would be folly. Were I to do so, I would most seriously risk spoiling the effectiveness of the stories I have based upon it. I have not seen at least one writer of genius so stumble, namely Robert Chambers, who actually sat down to write his infamous and horrible King in Yellow. I refer naturally to the play, not the existing book. Whereas, he might much better have left it afloat in the imagination of the reader. The play is a fine work, but it could not possibly have been either as fine or as frightening as his stories adumbrate it. It is his good fortune, and ours, that it has never been published, so that we are free to continue to dream of it fearfully and never know what it says or means. So, Blish is very tongue-in-cheek with this story. He is not breaking the fourth wall, but he is tap dancing on the architecture of it when he wrote this story. I once exchanged a few letters with Lovecraft myself, as you may see in his volume of collected letters. I knew not only the handwriting and the letter paper, but also the upholstery style. This was authentic, I said. I begin to see where this is going. Of course you do. But bear in mind that back in those days, you see the date, 1937, I had never heard of Chambers. I hunted down the short story collection, then nothing would prevent me from seeing the play. Conscienceless teenager that I was, I demanded that HPL send me a copy. And here's the reply. Another sheet of blue notepaper was passed to me. It said, I do not really know what disposal to make to the King in Yellow, for Chambers and I were never intimate, and I was staggered that he sent me the play upon my very own tentative inquiry, so much like yours, and others about the Necronomicon, etc. The manuscript now in my hands is, I think, quite superb. Yet I've already told you, I would be hesitant to see it used to destroy the effective hints of it in his stories. On the other side, it is an object lesson in when not to follow up such hints, and contains much beauty as well as much terror that should not remain hidden. What therefore I have done is to have a typescript made by a young lady who has been trading me secretarial work for some small editing services of my own, and send you here with the carbon copy, with the injunction that no right of publication adheres in its transmission. This too was an authentic letter, I was convinced. All right, that was 30 years ago. And yet you didn't read the play then, if in fact you did get it. You say you hadn't read it until just a little while ago. Why not? I was outgrowing Lovecraft and all that crowd. Also, I was ashamed to have been taken in by the Necronomicon and didn't want to be taken in again. I was having a fight with a fat boy down the block over an even fatter redhead, and a lot of other things intervened. In short, I put off reading it for a couple of weeks, and during those couple of weeks, Lovecraft died, before I had even the courtesy to thank him for having sent me the play. After that, I was also embarrassed for my own thoughtlessness, and I put the play away. And soon after, Jim, I managed to forget all about it. No earthquake could have buried it more thoroughly than my own sense of guilt, plus my own contempt at myself for ever having been a fantasy fan at all. If you don't understand how that could have happened, then I will abort the rest of the story right here. No, I understand it well enough. I'm not sure I credit it, but I do understand it. Go on. I didn't think of it again until 1967, when Ace republished the short story collection. Then, of course, I was reminded that, if indeed there had ever been such a play, I was the only one in the world who had a copy. At least no such thing ever turned up in Chambers' own papers. He died in 1933, and Lovecraft's typed copy in the manuscript must have been lost. What makes you think so? Lovecraft's literary executors have been publishing every scrap of HPL they could find, including his laundry list. If they had found the King in Yellow, the world would know it by now. If my copy is real, it is the last one and the only one. So I got it out of my safe deposit box and read it. And again, Blish is being facetious, but also true. A lot of writers, the executors of Lovecraft's estate, specifically August Derleth, They rode his corpse like a toboggan with everything that he left behind. Any note, any little scrap of unfinished story that Lovecraft left behind became a posthumous collaboration. Really, though, it was just an excuse to slap Lovecraft's name on it so that it could sell, when really it was more like Derleth's own fan fiction, with just the slightest little tidbits of words that came from Lovecraft himself. I think of like the Venture Brothers, the fantastic Mr. Brisby, like, of course you kept his notes. You've been riding his corpse's coattails your entire adult life. That was Derleth. I appreciate everything Derleth did in establishing Arkham House and preserving Lovecraft tales, but I will never not be a critic of his own writing. What does Samantha make of all this? Oh, she knows most of what I told you, but she just thinks I'm being more than usually neurotic. You know how writers are. These city college types have pat explanations out of Karen Horney and Eric Fromm for everything. It saves them the trouble of thinking. And I'm not about to change her mind either. I certainly haven't shown her the play. Female common sense would blow the whole thing sky high in a minute. And you're now about to tell me that you won't show it to me either. On the contrary, he said, a malicious grin splitting his beard and mustache apart. It's really not so terrible. I'm sure it can't hurt you a bit. As you said downstairs, life is more horrible than any possible book. Goddamn right. Then what is the matter with you, Bill? You're a good deal more hard-nosed than I am. You're the last person I'd expect to be scared by Oscar Wilde or Lovecraft or Arthur Machen or any of the rest of that crowd. I can't imagine you're trying to scare me either. You know I know better. That's not the point. As I've said, the play isn't very frightening, but I say that with reservations because I have not read all of it. Not even yet. I don't follow you. I have not been able to finish reading it, Atheling said with a kind of sad patience. There is a point in the play at which I have to quit. It varies from reading to reading, by a line or so to one side or the other, but I do know the place that I haven't yet been able to get beyond. Now I know from another Lovecraft letter, which I'll show you after you've read the play, that he also found this to be the case for him, but that he had to quit several whole pages before I did. I find this curious, and I have no explanation for it at all. I want to know when you have to stop, if you do. May I suggest a very simple expedient? Oh, God, sure. Turn to the last page. I've done that. I know how it ends. I know every line of it. I could set it to music if I had to. That's not my point. I'm talking only about the cumulative effect, not the state of the text. I want to know how far you get the first time through. I'll finish it, I said. Have you messed with the typescript at all, Bill? No. There were notes at the back that evidently were intended to be put into a later draft, and I prepared a version into which I've incorporated them, or those I could understand. But this in the folder is the original. He handed the folder to me. Well, I was hooked, or anyhow prepared to be amused, and if possible, admiring of Sour Bill's ingenuity. Okay, where do I sleep? You can have our room. Samantha's with her mother for the whole week to come, some psychiatric casework sort of chore, so you can rattle around at will. I'll use the guest room. Take the bottle. I don't need it. But don't tell me in the morning that you had to quit reading because you got fried. I want a complete report. You'll get it. I opened the folder. Inside it was what would have been the most brittle sheaf of yellow-brown edged second sheets in the world, had they not each been carefully cased in plastic. I bore them off. The bed was a magnificent old floor poster, quite in keeping with the house. It had a small projector-style reading lamp fastened to the headboard. I washed up and settled down. Just as I did so, either Atheling's furnace or his refrigerator went on, and all the lights in the house dimmed momentarily. Evidently, his wiring needed tended to, which wasn't unusual in these old brownstones either. It was a nice coincidence, and I relished it. Then I poured myself a sizable slug of the brandy and began to read. This is what I read. Act 1. A balcony of the palace in Hastur, overlooking the Lake of Holly, which stretches to the horizon, blank, motionless, and covered with a thin haze. The two suns sink toward the rippleless surface. The fittings of the balcony are opulent, but dingy with time. Several stones have fallen from the masonry and lie unheeded. Casilda, a queen, lies on a couch overlooking the lake, turning in her lap a golden diadem set with jewels. A servant enters and offers her a tray, but it is nearly empty. Some bread, a jug. She looks at it hopelessly and waves it away. The servant goes out. Enter Prince Ott, a portly man in his early millions. Good day, mother. Goodbye, day. You have been looking at Carcosa again. No. Nobody can see Carcosa before the Hyades rise. I was only looking at the Lake of Holly. It swallows so many suns. And you will see it swallow so many more. These mists are bad for you. They seep into everything. Come inside. No, not now. I am not afraid of a little mist, nor of a little time. I have seen quite a lot of both. This interminable siege. Would that the lake would swallow Alar for once instead of the suns. Not even Holly can do that, since Alar sits upon Deme, which is quite another lake. One lake is like another, water and fog, fog and water. If Hastur and Alar changed sites between moons, nobody would notice. They are the two worst situated cities in the world. Necessarily, since they are the only ones. Except Carcosa. Well, I am not sure, my prince, that Carcosa is in the world. In any event, it is certainly fruitless to talk about the matter. Camilla, a princess, enters, then hesitates. Come ahead, Camilla, hear us. There are no secrets any longer. Everything has been worn thin and time has stopped. Enter Thale, the younger prince. Nonsense again, mother. If it pleases you to call it that, Prince Thale. As for me, I am only a queen. I can be mocked at will. But no, I didn't mean mockery or no, Prince Thale is right. Time does not stop. It is a contradiction in terms. Time stops, my Ott, when you have heard every possible banality every possible number of times. Whenever has anything happened in Hastur, please? Any new word or any new event? The siege, as you very justly and repeatedly observed, is right flat out interminable, and that's that. Neither Hastur nor Alar will ever prevail. We shall both just wear down into dust or boredom, whichever arrives first. I'm sorry for you, Ott, but I'm afraid you only remind me now that there's no future in being human. Even as a baby, you were a little dull. You may say what you please of me, too, for royalty, of course, has its privileges. All the same, not all time is in the past, Casilda. It lies in your power to change things, were you not so weary of us and of yourself. Oh, are we to talk of the secession again? Nothing is duller than dynasties. Mother, must the dynasty die only because you are bored? Only a word from you, and the black stars would rise again. Whatever your soothsaying, Alar cannot stand against them. You know that. It would be an act of mercy to the people. The people? Who are they? You care as little for the people as Ott does, Thale. I know your heart and his as well. All the diadem means to either of you is your sister. There's no other reward now for being a king in Hastur. As for black stars, enough. They radiate nothing but the night. Camilla loves me. Liar! Camilla, ask her if you dare. Who would dare without the diadem? You're not so bold, Watt. Have you found the yellow sign? Stop your mouth and stop your bickering, you two frogs. I will ask her. I am not ready to be asked, mother. No. Camilla, you could have the diadem. Then you could take your pick of your brothers and we'd have an end to all of our problems. See how I tempt you? The dynasty would go on and you'd be free of all this conniving. Perhaps even the siege would end. Well, Camilla, speak. No, please. You cannot give the diadem to me. I will not have it. And why not? Then I would be sent the yellow sign. Possibly, if one can believe the runes. But would that be so very terrible? Tell us, Camilla, what, after all, does happen when one receives the yellow sign? It is come for, so they say. I have never seen it happen, but suppose it does. Who comes for it? The phantom of truth. And what is that? Please, I do not know. No more do I. But suppose, Camilla, whatever it is, that perhaps it's real. What then? Does it frighten you? Yes, mother. All right. If that's the case, then I shall give the diadem to one of your brothers and end this steamy botheration in some other way. You have only to choose between them as they ask. I would be delighted to give you a marriage in the utmost of state. At the very least, it would be a novelty in a small and noisy way. A wise decision, and not a small one, mother. But, mother, there is something new. We do not need a stately wedding yet. That's what I came to tell you, just before the old quarrel started up again. And what is that? Mother, there's a stranger in the city. A stranger? Now, living God, hear that. You all have the mists of Holly in your brains. I know every face in Hastur and Alar, too. Camilla, how many people do you think there are in the living world? A spade of handfuls, and I've seen them all. This one is new in Hastur. Nobody these days goes about Hastur but the hearse driver. Sensible people hide their faces, even from themselves. But that's it. You can't see his face. He's walking masked. Oh, covered with a veil. Or is he hooded? Neither, mother. He wears another face. A white mask, whiter than the mists. The eyes are blank and it has no expression. In all conscious, straight enough. How does he explain it? He speaks to no one. I will see him. He will speak to me. Everyone does. And then he'll be unmasked. But mother, this is only a conceit. It is of no moment in the tree of time. If Camilla will but choose and bring back the succession, we will talk of that some other time. Send me now Notalba and the man in the pallid mask. Camilla does not wish to choose now, and no more do I. Time is running out. There has been no king in Hastur since the last Eldonis. Do not tell me again the story of the last king. Oh, I am so sick of you all. I tell you now, do you goad me further, there will be no other king in Hastur till the king in yellow. There is a long shocked silence. Camilla, Ott, and Thale go out, stunned and submissive. Casilda lies back, exhausted and brooding. Enter a child with jeweled fingers, wearing a small duplicate of the diadem. Tell me a story. Not now. Please, tell me a story, please. I do not like telling you a story now. Grandmother. Casilda sets up resignedly. She does not look at the child. Once upon a time, that's better. There were 2 lakes in the heart of Gondwana land called Deme and Holly. For millions of years they lay there with no one to see them, while strange fishes bit their surfaces. Then there appeared a city by the Lake of Holly. And it should be, if you've all been in on these symbolism streams, you should all be picking up on how shy coded this all is. The Ash River, strange fishes bite at their surfaces. He walks around in a mask. He's veiled. Nobody knows who he is. Just like the people of Ashai, wear masks or veils and nobody sees them, and they're all hiding their faces for one reason or another. Again, Carcosa, Ashai, is very much modeled after Carcosa. That's not a story, that's only history. It is the only story that there is. Besides, if you'll be quiet, I shall tell you the rest that's in the runes. Is that agreed? Oh, good. I'm not supposed to know what's in the runes. That doesn't matter now. But to go on, the city had 4 singularities. The first singularity was that it appeared overnight. The second singularity was that one could not tell whether the city sat upon the waters or beyond them on the invisible other shore. The third singularity was that when the moon rose, the towers of the city appeared to be behind it, not in front. Shall I go on? Of course, I know all the rest. Misfortunate prince. Well then, the fourth singularity was that as soon as one looked upon the city, one knew what its name was. Carcosa, even as today. And after a long time, men came to the lakes and built mud huts. The huts grew into the city of Hastur, and soon a man arose who proclaimed himself king in Hastur. Aldonis, my grandfather. Yes, some ages back. And he decreed that all the kings in Hastur thereafter should bear his name. He promised that if his dynasty be maintained, then someday Hastur would be as great as Carcosa across the waters. Thank you. That's enough. No, it is not enough. That night someone heard him. You have asked and must hear the end. I have to leave now. I forgot something. And that same night, he found the yellow sign. The child runs out. Casilda opens her eyes and resumes watching across the lake. A page enters with a torch, fixes it in a sconce, and goes out again. Casilda does not stir. In the near darkness, Notalba, a priest, enters. My queen, my priest, you forgot the fifth singularity. And you are an incurable eavesdropper. I am not surprised. In any event, one does not mention the mystery of the Hyades to a child. No, but you think of it. No. Everyone today imputes philosophy to me. I'm not so thoughtful. It is only that the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen commonly in the afternoon. Dusk is dusk. Long thoughts cast long shadows at any time of day. And no news is good news. Notalba, must you wash me clean with banalities too? Next you will be speaking of the succession. As a matter of fact, nothing was farther from my mind. A good place for nothing. I am pleased to hear you jesting. Nonetheless, I have something else to tell you. The man in the pallid mask. You have heard. Good, then I'll be brief. Good. I think you should not see him. What? Nothing will prevent me. Do you think I'll refuse the only novelty in human history such as it is? You know me little. I know you better than you know yourself, and nothing is certain but death and... Oh, living God. You spoke? Ignore me. Why should I not see this man? It is by no means certain that he is a man, and if he is, at best, he is a spy from Alar. There is a very long silence, as if something had interrupted the action. Both Casilda and Notalba remain absolutely immobile throughout. Then their dialogue resumes, as if both were quite unaware of the break. A poor spy, then, to be so conspicuous. In any event, poor priest, what is there that Alar does not know about us? That is why we are in this impasse in the war. We know everything. Were one stone to fall on Alar that I did not hear about, the war would be over. And Aldonis, poor man, is in the same whale. But he knows me, and I know him, and that's the end of the matter. We shall die of this glut of familiarity, he and I, lying in the same tomb, measuring away at each other's hair and fingernails in the hopes of some advantage even in death. Why would he send a spy? He is the father of my tiresome children and the architect of my miserable city. Oh, Notalba, How I wish I could tell him something that he does not know. He would die of joy, and Alar would sink into the lakes, Hastur thereafter. Perhaps. You think more highly of novelty than I do. It is a weakness in you, but I myself do not think this creature in the pallid mask to be a spy. You are surprised, but no. I only said of the possibility at best. All right, I yield you that. The worst, then. This thing may be the phantom of truth. Only ghosts go about in white. Oh. Is that moment come? I see. Then I was wise to abort the dynasty after all. I am not often wise. Perhaps any good is a good end, if it truly is an end. But Notalba, speak. I have not found the sign. Of course not, or you would have told me. But we cannot be sure that the sign is always sent. The sender. He falls silent. Casilda, perceiving that she has the upper hand, again grins mercilessly. Is the king in yellow? Well, yes. The king warns, as he warned the first Eldonis. We know nothing about him but that, and should not know. Why not? Perhaps he is dead. Notalba abruptly hides his face. Or too busy in Carcosa that he has forgotten to send the sign. Why not? We are well taught that with the king in yellow, all things are possible. I have not heard you. You did not speak. I only spoke to your point, my priest, that this man in the pallid mask may indeed be the phantom of truth, though I have not found the sign no more than you. That was what you were saying, was it, knight? Was it not? Be silent if you wish. I'll chance it. Blasphemy. Is the king a god? I think not. In the meantime, Notalba, I would dearly love to see the face of truth. It must be curious. I have laid every other ghost in the world. Send me this man or phantom. Here indeed I did have to stop for a moment. Not because I was in the least frightened, but because my eyes were tiring after so many pages of dim-rubbed, time-brown carbon copy. And just at this instant, the Queen Mary, or whatever it was Atheling kept in his basement, got underway again and dimmed the lights. To the point where the letters swam in front of my eyes. Then the light came up again. I took another pull at the brandy and went on. Exit Notalba. The stranger enters. He is wearing a silken robe on which the yellow sign is embroidered. A single character in no human script, in gold against a circular background. Casilda turns to look at him, and then with a quick and violent motion, plucks the torch from the sconce and hurls it from the balcony into the lake. Now there is only starlight. I have not seen you. I have not seen you. You echo your priest. You are all blind and deaf, obviously by choice. I suppose it is too late to be afraid. Well, then I am not. Well spoken, Queen. There is in fact nothing to be afraid of. Please, Phantom, no nonsense. You wear the sign. How do you know that? You have never seen the yellow sign. Oh, I know the sign. The sign is in the blood. That is why I aborted the dynasty. No blood should have to carry such knowledge through a human heart. No children's teeth so set on edge. You face facts. That is a good beginning. Very well. Then yes, in fact, this is the sign. Whoop. I'm gonna have to put you on pause. right. Sorry about that. I had a phone call I had to take. Oh, geez. Okay. All right. That interrupted the flow. Where were? Okay. Okay. So the stranger says that he does in fact bear the sign. All right. You face facts. That is a good beginning. Very well. Then yes, in fact, this is the sign. Nevertheless, Casilda, your Majesty, Casilda, there is nothing to fear. You see how I wear it with impunity. Be reassured, it has no power left. Is that a truth? It is the shadow cast by a truth. Nothing else has ever vouchsafed us, Queen Casilda. That is why I am white, in order to survive such colored shadows, and the pallid mask protects me as it will protect you. How? It deceives. That is the function of a mask. What else? You are not very full of straight answers. There are no straight answers, but I tell you this. Anyone who wears the pallid mask need never fear the yellow sign. You tremble. All the same, my queen, that era is over. Whatever else could you need to know? Now your dynasty can start again. Again, there can be a king in Hastur. And again, Casilda, the black stars can mount the sky once more against the Hyades. The siege can be lifted. Humankind can have its future back. So many dreams. Only where the mask and these are given, there's no other thing required of us. Who tells me this? I am called Yatil. That is only a Lauren for stranger. And Aldonis is only Hasturic for father. What of that? Your facts are bitterer than your mysteries, and what will happen to you, Yatil, you with the yellow sign on your bosom when the sign is sent for? Nothing at all. What has Carcosa ever had to do with the human world since you all lived in mud huts? The king in yellow has other concerns, as is only supernatural. Once you don the pallid mask, he cannot even see you. Do you doubt me? You have only to look again for yourself across the lake. Carcosa does not sit upon the earth. It is perhaps not even real, or not so real as you and I. Certainly, the living God does not believe in it. Then why should you? You are plausible, you and your ghost face. You talk as if you know the living God. Do you also hear the Hyades sing in the evening of the world? No, that is strictly the king's business. It is of no earthly interest to me. I dare say. How can I trust any of these answers? Do we indeed have to do nothing more to be saved than don white masks? It sounds to me like a suspiciously easy answer. Test it then. And die, thank you very much. Not so fast. I will not kill you, or myself. I propose a mask, if you will pardon me the wordplay. All will wear exactly what they choose, except that all will also wear the pallid mask. I myself shall wear the yellow sign, just as I do now. When you are all convinced, the masks will be doffed, and then you may announce the succession, all in perfect safety. Oh, indeed. And then the king descends. And if the king should then descend, we are all lost, and I have lost my bet. I have nothing to lose but my life. You have more. And if the king does not descend, what then? Think. The yellow sign denatured, human life suddenly charged with meaning, hope flowering everywhere, the phantom of truth laid forever, and the dynasty free of all fear of Carcosa and whatever monsters live there. Sorry about that. People are moving, and I had to close the door. I got new neighbors moving in, and they're making noise. All right. Usually don't have these types of interruptions during these streams. All right. Okay, so the yellow sign denatured human life's fear of Carcosa, whatever. The phantom of truth laid forever, and the dynasty free of all fear of Carcosa and whatever monsters live there. Free of all fear of the king in yellow and his tattered, smothering inhuman robes. Oh, living God, how would I dare to believe you? You do not dare not to. During this conversation, the moon has been rising slowly, contrary to the direction of sunlight, and the stars fade, though they do not quite disappear. Long waves of clouds begin to pass over the surface of the Lake of Holly, which begins to sigh and heave. Spray rises. The stranger and Casilda stare at each other in a dawn and sunset of complicity and hatred. Why would I not dare? I who am Casilda. I who am I. Because, Casilda, risk nothing and you risk it all. That is the first law of rulership. And two, because, Casilda, in your ancient heart, you love your children. Oh, you are a demon. You have found me out. That is what I came for. Very well. I shall see you tomorrow after sunset. Wear the mask, and all eyes will be opened, all ears unstopped. Good night, my queen. If you are human, you'll regret this. Utterly. And so, good night. The stranger goes out. Casilda puts her hand to her head and finds that she is no longer wearing the diadem. She gropes for it and finally locates it among the cushions. She starts to put it on and then instead stands at the balcony rail, turning the crown in her hands. The lights go down into semi-darkness. The fog rises in the moonlight. The stars disappear. On the horizon, seemingly afloat upon the Lake of Holly, appear the towers of Carcosa, tall and lightless. The center of the city is beyond the rising moon, which seems to be dripping white blood into the lake. Enter Notalba. And so, good night, my queen. You saw him? I think so. And he says the king in yellow can be blinded. And you heard him out. Now very surely we are indeed all mad. Curtain. Right while I was in the middle of that last long stage direction, the damned lights flickered again, and this time they did not come all the way back to full brightness. Sour Bill really ought to have that wiring checked, or someday soon his fine old Victorian bungalow was going to burn down. However, this was a natural place to pause and ponder. The text thus far at least settled one suspicion that I had not mentioned to Atheling, that if Atheling himself had written it, perhaps Lovecraft had. Having already invented a number of imaginary literary works, HPL was in theory quite likely to have concocted still another one. In theory, but Lovecraft never wrote more than a few fragments of his own imaginary reference works. Why should he attempt to create the whole of one imagined by another author? Moreover, a play in blank verse was not a likely sort of production for Lovecraft, whose poetic gifts were feeble at best. Mean! Lovecraft may not have been the most poetic, but I think Fungi from Yuggoth is a great poem. Whereas Chambers, I seem to recall, had not only published several volumes of verse, but several plays and even an opera libretto. Also, the text thus far already showed a few flashes of humor, a trait not at all characteristic of Lovecraft. Of course, none of this ruled out Atheling as the probable author, despite the aged paper, but I was pretty sure that it did not rule out the Spook of Innsmouth. What about the play proper, then? Horrifying it was not. It was not even as evil as a 17th century tragedy of blood. Also, it was pretty derivative, chiefly of Wilde and Poe's The Silence and The Mask of the Red Death. and it was terribly dated. I suppose no man living today is in a position to understand why so many of the writers of the 1890s thought that yellow was an especially ominous color. Grumbling about the light, I brought the smudged pages closer, wondering why I was bothering at all. By this time, I was tired as well as impatient, and, I am afraid, a fact a little drunk, despite Aethling's warning. Then I discovered that the next page was a misplaced one. Instead of the first page of the second act, it was the dramatis personae page, which should have been all the way at the front, with one exception. It was nothing but a list of the names, including the king, who so far hadn't appeared at all. The exception was this notation. Nota bene, except for the stranger and the king, everyone who appears in the play is black. Nota bene indeed. It would be hard to imagine another single instruction which could so completely change the whole apparent thrust and effect of what I had read so far. Or did it? Perhaps I was only projecting our current racial troubles into the direction. Chambers may merely have meant to suggest, if he had been that much of an anthropologist, that after all our remote prehistoric ancestors had been black. Then I remembered, too, that in the very first story about the King in Yellow, Chambers had proposed banishing all Negroes to a new state of Swanee, which we did talk about back when we read an hour ago in the Repair of Reputations, what he was going for in that. Now both wider awake and a great deal more disoriented, I put the misplaced page aside and plunged on. Act 2. The child appears before the curtain. I am not the prologue nor the afterword. Call me the prototaph. My role is this, to tell you it is now too late to close the book or quit the theater. You already thought you should have done so earlier, but you stayed. How harmless it all is. No definite principles are involved, no doctrines promulgated in these pristine pages, no convictions outraged. But the blow has fallen, and now it is too late. And shall I tell you where the sin lies? It is yours. You listened to us, and all the same you stay to see the sign. Now you are ours, or since the runes also run backwards, we are yours forever. The stage is in darkness when the curtains part. After a pause, there are a few soft spare chords of music, and the voice of Casilda is heard singing. Along the shore, the cloud waves break. The twin suns sink behind the lake. The shadows lengthen. In Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies. But stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades shall sing, where flap the tatters of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou unsung, as tears unshed shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. A murmur of voices and music rises under the last verse. The lights go up to reveal that the front of the stage has become a crowded ballroom with the balcony at its back. The stranger and all the Hastorites are present. All the latter wear white masks with the visage of the stranger, to which individual taste has added grotesque variations. The result is that each mask looks like a famous person. The costumes are also various and fantastic. The stranger still wears the silken robe with the yellow sign, and Casilda, though masked, still wears the diadem, as does the child. Many are dancing to a formal measure, something like a saraband, something like stalking. Camilla is talking to the stranger, front left. Casilda watches the mask from the balcony. Camilla is talking to the stranger. Casilda watches the mask from the balcony. Carcosa and the Hyades behind her. The moon has vanished. There, princess, you see that there has been no sending, and there will be none. The pallid mask is the perfect disguise. How would we know a sending if it came? Casilda descends and joins them. The messenger of the king drives a hearse. Oh, Half the population of Hastur does that. It is the city's most popular occupation since the siege began. All that is talk. I have heard what the talkers were talking, the talk of the beginning and in the end. But I do not talk of the beginning or the end. But the sending, let us hear. Also, the messenger of the king is a soft man. Should you greet him by the hand, one of his fingers would cut off to join yours. Camilla recoils in delicate disgust. Notalba, who has been circling closer and closer to the group, now joins it. A pretty story. You seem to know everything. I think perhaps you could even tell us, given gold, the mystery of the Hyades. He is king there. As everywhere. Everyone knows that. He is not king in Aldebaran. That is why Carcosa was built. It is a city in exile. These two mighty stars are deep in war, like Hastur and Alar. Oh, indeed. Who then lives in Carcosa? Nothing human. More than that I cannot tell you. Your springs of invention run dry with suspicious quickness. Be silent. Stranger, how did you come by all of this? My sigil is Aldebaran. I hate the king. And his is the yellow sign, which you mock him by flaunting before the world. I tell you this, he will not be mocked. He is a king whom emperors have served, and that is why he scorns a crown. All this is in the runes. There are great truths in the runes. Nevertheless, my priest, Aldebaran is his evil star. Thence comes the pallid mask. Be like. But I would rather be deep in the cloudy depths of Deme than to wear what you wear on your bosom. When the king opens his mantle. Somewhere in the palace, a deep-toned gong begins to strike. Have done. Now is the time I have never thought to see. I must go and announce the succession. Perhaps the world itself is indeed about to begin again. How strange. As the gong continues to strike, everyone begins to unmask. There are murmurs and gestures of surprise, real or polite, as identities are recognized or revealed. Then there is a wave of laughter. The music becomes louder and increases in tempo. You, sir, should unmask. Indeed, it's time. We have all laid aside disguise but you. I wear no mask. No mask? No mask? I am the pallid mask itself. I am the phantom of truth. I came from Alar. My star is Aldebaran. Truth is our invention. It is our weapon of war. And see, by this sign we have conquered, and the siege of good and evil is ended. On the horizon, the towers of Carcosa begin to glow. Look, Carcosa! Carcosa is on fire! The stranger laughs and seizes Camilla by the wrists. His hands! His hands! At her cry, the music dies discordantly. Then a tremendous, inhuman voice rolls from Carcosa across the Lake of Holly. Yitil. The stranger releases Camilla, who screams wordlessly and falls. The light faded further with a distant mechanical rumble. My eyes ached abominably, and I realized that I should have had a bath. I felt itchy. The carbon by this time was so weak that the letters looked as though they had been typed in ashes. There were whole lines I simply could not read, and I was developing a clamorous headache. God damn Atheling and his hypnotic tricks. Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? Have you found the yellow sign? I am the phantom of truth. Tremble, O king in tatters. The phantom of truth shall be laid. The scalloped tatters of the king must hide Yitil forever. As for thee, Hastur, no. As for thee, we tell thee this. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. The stranger falls. and everyone else sinks slowly to the ground after him. The king can now be seen, although only faintly. He stands in state upon the balcony. He has no face and is twice as tall as a man. He wears pointed shoes under his tattered, fantastically colored robes, and a streamer of silk appears to fall from the pointed tip of his hood. Behind his back, he holds inverted a torch with a turned and jeweled shaft, which emits smoke but no light. At times, he appears to be winged, at others, haloed. These details are for the customer. At no time should the king be sufficiently visible to make them all out. Behind him, Carcosa and the Lake of Holly have vanished. Instead, there appears at his back a huge sculptured shield, in shape suggesting a labyrinth of onyx, upon which the yellow sign is chased in gold. The rest of the stage darkens gradually, until, at the end, it is lit only by the decomposed body of the stranger, phosphorescing bluely. I have enfolded ye till, and the phantom of truth is laid. Henceforth, the ancient lies will rule as always. Now, Casilda. Casilda rises mutely to her knees. Thou wert promised a dynasty by truth, and in truth shalt thou have a dynasty. The kingdom of Hastur was first in all the world, and would have ruled the world except for this. Carcosa did not want it. Hence thereafter, Hastur and Alar divided, but those in Alar sent you from Aldebaran the phantom of truth, and all was lost. Together, you forgot the covenant of the sign. Now there is much which needs to be undone. How, king? How? Henceforth, Hastur and Alar will be divided forever. Forever shalt thou contend for mastery and strive in bitter blood to claim which shall be uppermost, flesh or phantom, black or white. In due course of star wheels, this strife will come to issue. But not now. Oh no, not now. And until then, Carcosa will vanish. But my rule, I tell you now is permanent, despite Aldebaran. Be warned, also be promised. He who triumphs in this war shall be my, can I be honest, inheritor, and so shall have the dynasty back. But think, already you own the world. The great query is, can you rule it? The query is the gift. The king in yellow gives it onto your hands to hold, or to let loose. Choose, terrible children. You are king, and are most gracious. We thank you. You thank me? I am the living God. Bethink thyself, priest. There is a price. I have not as yet stated the half of it. Everyone waits petrified. The price is the fixing of the mask. Silence. You do not understand me. I will explain it once and then no more. Hastur, you acceded to and wore the pallid mask. That is the price. Henceforth all in Hastur shall wear the mask, and by this sign be known. And war between the masked men and the naked shall be perpetual and bloody until I come again, or fail to come. Maltoba starts to his knees. Unfair. Unfair. It was Alar invented the pallid mask. Aldonis, why should I be fair? I am the living God. As for Aldonis, he is the father of you all. That is the price. The fixing of the mask. Not upon us. O king, not upon us. No. Mercy, not upon us. Yitil. 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 The king vanishes, and with him his throne. The Hyades and Carcosa are once more visible over the balcony rail. The mass of corruption that had been the stranger rises slowly and uncertainly. The child runs out from the crowd, and seizing the stranger by one mushy hand, leads him shambling out across the balcony in the wake of the king. There is a low composite my voice is starting to go. There is a low composite moan as they exit, standing and throwing her arms wide. Not upon us! Not upon us! Offstage, remote, diminishing. What? Did you think to be human still? And if we now? The light faded out entirely. And high time, too. I was so exhausted I was outright sick. Odd noises rang through my pounding head. Sometimes I thought I could hear lines from the play being spoken, as if in an echo chamber, or sometimes even being sung. Occasionally, too, there was a spitting howl, which seemed to come from behind the house. I remember that the Aethelings kept cats, though I had not seen any during this visit, and the rumbling below ground was now continuous, like stones being slowly and mindlessly crushed to powder. Aetheling had won. Whether by suggestion or by alcohol, I could not tell, but I could not finish the King in Yellow. And worse, much worse, was that I felt so dirty that I could hardly bear to touch myself. I was a blackened man lying in a pool of soot. My rings were cutting off my fingers. There were maggots feeding in my ears. And deaf, dumb, blind, anosmic, numb, and convicted, I came apart into a universe of slimy saffron rags. I awoke in a blast of painful yellow sunlight, with that lowering feeling of being about to be found out, which is for me the most intolerable symptom of a hangover. There were neither curtains nor shades on the windows, which made it worse. No matter how recently I had moved into a new place, curtaining the master bedroom would have been the first thing I'd have done. Then I realized that Aetheling was standing over me in that holier-than-thou pose he assumes when he thinks he's about to lose an argument, looking absurdly knobby in a short red flannel nightshirt and a tasseled red nightcap, and holding out to me a tall red drink. Bloody Mary, he said tersely. Breakfast below in a while. Where did you stop? I looked around confusedly. The pages in their plastic sheaths turned out to be all over the floor on the window side of the bed. Getting up, I risked dizziness to pick them up and align them on the bedside table, wincing a little at the sharp cracks the plastic edges made against the wood. Never mind that. I'll do it later. Where did you stop? Let me think a minute. I hate people who expect me to be awake before noon. I stopped at Natalba's speech just after the King's. Which speech of the King's? The offstage ones, where he asked, did you think to be human still? Damn you. That's farther than I ever got. You were almost at the end. What does happen at the end? Nothing. The child comes back on stage and draws the curtain. That's all? That's all. I can't understand it. You were so close, only one line short. There must be somebody who can get to the end by first intention. What stopped you? The simplest thing in the world, Bill, your damned wiring. The lights kept fading on me. Eventually, my eyes wore out and I fell asleep. No mystery, just eye strain. I added honestly, probably the brandy helped. Oh, he said. And then again. Oh, no more than that. Evidently, it doesn't matter who reads it after all. Leave the play on the nightstand. I'll put it in my wall safe and forget about it. Samantha won't have any trouble forgetting about it. She thinks it's all psychosomatic anyhow. And you might as well forget about it too. It's not the most memorable thing I ever read, that's for sure. No. He stood silent for a moment, and then he said, but I'll tell you something irrelevant now. But he didn't. He just stood there. Well, when I first bought this place, he went on in a remote voice, I planned to have air conditioning installed, mainly to keep the soot out of Samantha's studio and off the windowsills. You know how filthy this town is. This seemed irrelevant indeed, but knowing Aetheling, I waited. So, I had the house converted to 220 volts, top to bottom, all in BX cables. We had to rip out half the walls to do it. It cost a fortune, but I could run a machine shop in here now if I had to. Then I swallowed and started again. Then what the hell is that grumbling in the cellar? That couldn't have been only eye strain. You've been out of town too long. The 7th Avenue IRT goes by only 2 blocks from here. I don't own any heavy machinery, and there is nothing wrong with the wiring. Nothing. He continued to hold out the drink to me over the bed, but I was no longer in the bed. Hadn't been for at least 5 minutes. The raw sunlight beat upon the blind and pallid mask of his face through the naked, dirty windows. He went on looking over my shoulder, or where my shoulder would have been, had I been where he thought I was. I left the house as quickly as I decently could. I hear lately that the Eightlings have given it up and moved to England. I should worry about them, I suppose, and I would if I had not just broken my 4th pair of new glasses right in the middle of a long novel project. I do sometimes wonder what he did with the play, but not often. The old adage is sadly true. Out of sight, out of mind. All right. And that is More Light. And yeah, it's a good story. I like the writing techniques that James Blish uses. Again, like he acknowledges himself, like, look, nobody can write this play, right? It's never gonna hold up to the illusion that's been created in the original horror stories, right? But you do see like a novel effort in doing it. But also the horror lays into it is that anytime someone is trying to read the play, it's like something is trying to come through. The lights flickering, they are all going out, especially at the time. Like as soon as he opens the book, right, the lights flicker. It's just the ominous feeling that something is watching, something is lurking out there and just waiting for its moment to come through. So other writers would go on to try and reconstruct the play. I mentioned in the video, Lynn Carter rewrites More Light in Tatters of the King, tragedy in verse. He makes it more poetic. If you read his version, it's done in the same structure as Blish, but it reads more like a Shakespearean play. Everyone's speaking all fancy like. James Blish, for his part, kind of kept more of a modern tone, which I actually prefer. It makes his version of the play is easier to read, but Carter's version of the play is more likely the one that would be performed if there were ever to be a proper stage play version of it. But yeah, and of course, the curse of Carcosa as the king. Again, alluding back to Ashai, everyone must now wear the mask. That is the price paid for to continue living, even after the king makes his appearance and essentially calls for the quaking of the world. And again, like if we relate this back to A Song of Ice and Fire, this is all like long night, fall of the great empire of the dawn. The Bloodstone Emperor, the last emperor, the lesser kings who rise in the aftermath, in the lesser kingdoms that continue to war and wait, and all groups of men, all tribes of men, all go their separate ways. And what is left of Ashai is the blighted place, the place with the glowing phosphorescent ash river. And he says even the stranger, after he succumbs to the king, starts to glow phosphorescent. And the people of Ashai wear their red lacquer masks and their veils, and only the Shadowbinders are brave enough to tread outside the walls of Ashai and go up to Stigai and the other outreaches. And what else about the Shadowland? Oh yeah, like dragons, demons, and worse make their homes out there. And when Casilda presses the stranger, Naltoba presses the stranger on it, like, well, what does live in Carcosa? And the stranger says monsters and other things that I cannot speak of. So again, this is just like George picking up little pieces of all these things and incorporating them into the world building. I guess a shy is his Carcosa, and then Carcosa, the name Carcosa actually being there, is fun world building, but also it's to hammer that home, right? George is crafting his own version of these very Lovecraftian cosmic horrors. Not even Lovecraftian because Chambers came before Lovecraft. So I guess so for a shy, we could say it's not just Lovecraftian. A shy is Chamber-esque, I guess we could say. But yeah, I thank you for everyone who came out and listened to me. I'm sorry for the interruptions that happened. But thank you for all the birthday messages, the super chats, and yeah, I will see you next time. Good night.